A problem I have with most horror games is that the more I play them, the less scary they become. The reason for this is that most horror games tend to utilize jump scares as the main scare tactic. And the problem lies within the feeling they evoke right after the fact. Keeping suspense is important for a good horror game, as it makes the player scared of the unknown and keeps them guessing as to what might happen next, and jump scares, while being scary in the moment, kill this tension in the long run, since they basically mean that nothing will happen for the next few minutes. I've played a good few different horror games and see this quote-unquote issue pretty frequently, especially when the jump scares are used to signify game over, usually when you die. Sure, these horror games can have a good atmosphere and are no doubt scary, but the further I got into them, the less I was afraid of the monsters, and the less impactful the scares felt. Don't get me wrong, it's not something that breaks the game and it isn't really that big of a deal, but it did get me thinking. There's other ways to make something scary without the use of jump scares, so what if a game did that? Building the tension but rarely breaking it, letting players fear the unknown and getting them to feel a near constant sense of unease that has the potential of staying with them far past the first playthrough. Darkwood is a survival horror game released in 2017 by Acid Wizard Studios, a small game dev team based in Poland. This was their first time making any type of game, and the fact that they made such a good survival horror game is very impressive. The thing with survival horror is that it expands on the base horror genre, by adding more substance in terms of gameplay and game mechanics that are usually tied into your survival. This extra depth in the game mechanics forces you to engage more with the game, getting more immersed, which makes the horror aspects more effective. Danger area unsafe, stay close to the lights. What the fuck? Fucking hell. Holy shit. Another great survival horror game that I've played in the past is Alien Isolation. Here, the main gameplay consists of stealthing around the various spacecrafts that are chock full of enemies like rebels, androids, and aliens, all of whom are out to kill you. With that, you have a looting and crafting system which closely ties into the stealth, since there are multiple craftable tools that directly aid you in remaining undetected. It's all done really well, and I enjoyed playing through the game, but eventually realized that it too suffers from the issue of repetitive jump scares, which water down the atmosphere and tension, and after that it just wasn't the same. You can't just spawn on top of me. Oh, that's stupid, what? Darkwood itself is a top-down game, which at first glance might seem like a poor choice of perspective for a horror game, but in reality, it works really well. Your vision is limited to an angle in front of the character, and this limitation adds a layer of paranoia and uncertainty regarding your surroundings. The rest of the world is still visible outside of the range with a grayscale filter, but that only goes for static objects, props, and parts of the environment, so enemies and characters don't get shown that way. This fact, combined with the sound design, makes you feel uneasy almost constantly, especially when exploring, as even the slightest sound will cause you to start doing 360s trying to see what made the noise. The game is also pretty dark, meaning most of the time you won't be able to see very far within your vision range anyway, and although I don't have claustrophobia, there were plenty of moments that felt uncomfortably cramped because of the limited vision and obstructed sightlines. The rest of the game is also built around the idea of putting you on edge, and let me say it does its job well. I got the game over 2 years ago, but only completed it recently, as the 2 or 3 previous times I tried ended with me getting so anxious and stressed that I ended up putting the game down for a while. I still have my first save file in which I made it to the Silent Forest, where I got stuck with a nail board and then eventually quit after around 13 days. This is because not only did the game scare me, but it was also very difficult. The combat feels intentionally awkward at first, as all melee attacks have charge times and getting hit not only causes your screen to shake but also stuns you, interrupting most actions like melee attacks, scoping in with guns, and using items. The way the combat is designed encourages you to avoid fighting, but eventually I realized that I have to face the monsters as I needed to explore and gather resources in order to progress. Then came the nights, growing more and more dangerous and unsettling, to a point where I would find myself dreading the next sunset and what it meant. Now, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, as I haven't yet talked about the very beginning, where it all starts. A crucial part of Darkwood is the story, which gets unraveled as you play and goes on to make sense and explain all the unnatural, bizarre, and downright terrifying events that transpired throughout the game. The story begins in the prologue, which also acts as the tutorial, which gets you familiar with the bare essential mechanics required to survive. When starting a new game, you're given the choice to toggle a few options, those being difficulty, whether to play the prologue, and an option for additional content. The prologue is a no-brainer if you're just starting to play the game, but even on my subsequent playthroughs, I tend to play it out to get the full experience. The option for additional content, though, is one I prefer to turn off, since, as it says, it adds some immersion-breaking content in the form of a dream sequence, which really confused me when I first saw it on my first save file. The general consensus regarding difficulty from what I've seen and read is that you should always play on hard. This is because the difficulty options only affect how many lives you have in-game, with normal being infinite, hard being 4, and nightmare acting as the permadeath hardcore mode. It makes sense that having a limited number of lives makes you more afraid of death, and as such, most people recommend starting out on hard to get the authentic Darkwood experience. I went in completely blind and chose normal mode for my first playthrough, but still ended up pissing myself on multiple occasions because I was so unaware of what the game was like. Afterwards, I replayed the game on hard, and had a similar experience because now I had to worry about not dying much more. I do regret not starting out on hard, but I think it really just comes down to personal preference and how much patience you have, as you're bound to lose your first few hard runs if you know close to nothing about the game. I see hatred and fear in their eyes. As if I were responsible for the spreading disease. As if I were the source of all the misery plaguing this land. I have nowhere to hide from them, nowhere to run. The woods have closed us off from the outside world. We are all doomed. The prologue starts by following a man, who we later get to know as the Doctor, waking up at his desk after falling asleep while doing work. You get a feel for the controls and actions you can do, like examining objects or opening doors, and then explore the house for a bit before being directed to go outside to find some gas for the generator. You find the key to the front door in a nearby wardrobe, and make your way outside, where you find the Doctor's dog, lying in the yard, gravely injured. A big selling point of Darkwood is that your actions matter, and most of what you do will affect you or the world around you in some way or another. Here, you have the choice of either mercy killing the dog with a nearby axe, or letting it continue to suffer, resulting in it eventually mutating into an enemy you might run into later on in the game. It's not a very important choice, as sometimes you won't even revisit this location, but it's more about the game showing you that your choices can have an impact, and that they shouldn't be taken lightly. As you explore following the map along the path, the Doctor remarks about the forest, its absurdly rapid growth, and how, as a result of that, it got so dense that it ended up isolating everyone living in the woods from the outside world. Further along, you find a fallen tree and a burnt-out campfire that you can scavenge to craft a torch, providing some light as you pass through an especially dense clump of trees. You make it to the clearing on the other side, but instead of a broken down tractor, you find an unconscious man. Walking up to him, the corners of the screen darken, and searching him you find a strange key engraved with the number 21 and the description reading, "If there's an exit out of these woods, this key will surely open it." He's unconscious. I've never seen him around here before. He's only carrying a key and some journal. Since he managed to sneak in here, he must know how to get out. Of course, he won't help me voluntarily. But that is of no importance. Perspectives flip, and now you play as the unconscious stranger from the clearing. The Doctor injects you with an unknown substance and attempts to interrogate you to see if you know a way out of the forest, eventually knocking you to the ground and leaving you locked in the room. After freeing yourself from the ropes, you scavenge the nearby pile of clothes and find some wires and rags, which you can use to craft a lockpick and bandages respectively. Using the lockpick, you're able to unlock the jammed container in the floorboards, where you find a used shovel and a flashlight. Using the shovel, you break down the barricaded door to get out of the room and spot the Doctor standing in front of you, but he disappears as the lights go out, leaving you to turn the power back on. Finding the generator in the back room, you grab a half-filled can of gasoline along with a table leg from the nearby chest before filling it up and turning it back on. Returning to the previous room, the radio on the floor has been replaced by a naked man with wires leading from his body and 2 dials instead of eyes. The man starts speaking and says 4 numbers, a passcode to the last locked door where you get ambushed by another man and are forced to knock him out with the table leg. At first it seems like you killed him, so you loot his body and acquire a plastic chick, a collectible item. It's at this point when you notice the sinister music that soon gets accompanied by growing sounds of whispers. Suddenly the man bleeding out on the ground starts chuckling, and then begins to mock you, obviously aware of what's about to happen. You get rescued by a mysterious figure, and Chapter 1 starts with you waking up sometime later in another house, one that is deserted and much more dilapidated. The map now shows a much larger area, consisting of 3 biomes, those being the Dry Meadow, Silent Forest, and Old Woods. There's also 2 markings in the Dry Meadows, one for the Dry Meadow hideout, where you currently are, and another marking labeled Underground Entrance. Exploring the hideout, the stranger notes the untriggered bear trap under one of the windows, saying that the previous night was exceptionally uneventful, implying that this isn't his first day in the forest. Looking through the rooms, there's a few pieces of furniture, some of which are containers containing basic materials like rags or bottles of alcohol, alongside 2 collectibles, a book titled The Use of Mushrooms in the Household, and a photo of a road in the woods, captioned The Road Home. Except for the bear trap and furniture, the hideout also has a workbench and an oven, both of which are essential. The workbench acts as a large storage container, and is the place where you craft and upgrade gear and make consumables and other various helpful items. On top of that, you can upgrade the workbench itself to unlock more sophisticated recipes for stuff like explosives and firearms later on. The oven has 2 distinct uses, that being serum creation and the spread of a protective substance throughout the hideout, making it at the very least inhabitable during the night by an outsider like yourself. The serums are cooked in increasing doses, using various native hallucinogenic organic materials found either growing or dropped by the various creatures of the forest. Injecting these doses, you can get various passive and active skills which provide various slight benefits that, I'll be honest, I forget I have half the time. Along with these positive skills, each skill tier also requires you to take a passive negative skill, which in some cases can be quite annoying to deal with. Of course, there's always the option to just not cook any doses, which is valid, but these serums also allow you to experience various dream sequences which can provide some material benefits. The second use of the oven is the protective substance that gets spread throughout the various pipes that you can notice lining the floor of the hideout. The stranger mentions that this oven has been prepared ahead of time, seeing as this was one of our hideouts. It's not obvious who the stranger was with, but they aren't natives, because those who live in the forest don't need this gas to survive at night. On the outside of the hideout, there's a sawmill for sawing logs into boards and a broken well, which when repaired can be used as a daily healing station. In only this hideout, there's also a locked crate around the side, which requires a 4-digit code to unlock. Now, I didn't look up how to unlock it, thinking the game would have me backtrack here at some point and get some better loot, but that never happened. As it turns out, the code to this crate was only given out to supporters of the game back when it was being funded, so I was waiting for nothing. Now, the game doesn't give you any guidance in terms of what to do during the first day, only saying that you should probably barricade some of the windows in the hideout before nightfall. At this point, you have no way of defending yourself, and while the Dry Meadows are relatively safe, having a weapon in hand always feels better, so one of the first things you'll probably want to do is find materials for a board with nails. It's the first melee weapon in the game, so unsurprisingly it isn't very durable or strong, with even the game calling it a crude weapon, but you can attack with your hands, so you're not given much of a choice. Exploring the Dry Meadow, you'll probably run into the few inhabitants of the biome, including dogs, savages, and elk, but right now they aren't a big problem, as they can be easily avoided by keeping your distance. I'd say calling savages an enemy a stretch here, since they are completely passive right now and actively try to run away from you, but later on they become one of the main enemy types you'll encounter, and even here you can actually kill them. Besides the enemies, you'll also find a bunch of set pieces, most of which get marked on the map when discovered, allowing you to easily track your position when at one. Almost all these set pieces have some resources for you to take, like gasoline, logs, rags, and bottles, and eventually you'll find your inventory full, so you'll probably make a few treks back to the hideout to dump the goods into the workbench. What I like about the inventory in this game is the simplicity, as there isn't any sort of weight limit that would affect your stamina or something like that. Instead, the game works around the fact that the inventory is split into 2 distinct sections, those being the hotbar and the rest of the space acting as the main storage. You can only directly use the items in your hotbar, so if you want to swap something out, you need to stop, open the main inventory, and after a short animation, swap out what you need. The thing is, when you open your main inventory, your vision gets limited massively, to a point where you can only see things a few steps away from you. It's a great touch that ends up working against you in most situations, especially during combat or in dangerous areas, since you have to make the active decision to go basically blind for a few seconds in order to put something in your hotbar, or drop something to make space for a more valuable item. On the topic of inventory, you know how a bunch of games allow you to have large inventories but then never explain where all the items actually get stored? It's a very small detail, and we all ignore when games do it, but Darkwood actually attempts to give an explanation as to how you're able to have such a large inventory capable of storing everything on you. When designing the game, a lot of concept art was made for the main character, and it turns out that you carry all the items in a bunch of satchels attached to harnesses under the trench coat. This is also supported by the fact that you can craft hotbar and inventory upgrades later on, and the sprites for those upgrades look exactly like the satchels that you wear. Again, it's a very small detail, and I bet most people don't even question it, but the fact that the developers thought it through shows the care they put into the game, and I respect that. Eventually, the sun starts setting, and the surroundings get bathed in a darkening orange light. At this point, the smart move would be to start heading back to the hideout to prepare for the night by filling the generator and sawing the acquired logs into boards to barricade the various windows and doorways. As you finish preparations, the sun sets completely, and the forest falls into darkness, signaling the beginning of the first night. Which almost always proves to be very uneventful, as almost no enemies appear, and those that do show up around the hideout tend to act more passively. Nonetheless, the nighttime ambience and occasional floorboard creak or footstep in the grass outside kept me feeling uneasy, even upon my subsequent playthroughs. The main thing that freaked me out, though, was when one of the doors opened on its own, as at first I thought that someone or something opened it, only later realizing that there was absolutely nothing there, and I actually got scared by a regular door. Morning comes, and with it a visitor, who you run into near the oven. In most cases, this visitor is the Wolfman, a man with what looks to be a wolf's head, wearing a hoodie with an AK-47 rifle strapped over his shoulder.
I never do this, but can I get your autograph? Been following you for a long time.
He's a shady character, to say the least, and from the first dialogue, it's obvious he isn't telling you everything, but he claims that he can help you reclaim what you've lost if you help him. He then tells you to prove that you're actually capable of making it out here by finding him in the Silent Forest at his camp, the location of which he marks on your map. Besides the main dialogue, he, like most other characters, can also be gossiped with and shown some specific collectible items like the road home photo. Most of these dialogues don't have much importance, with a few exceptions later on, but it's a nice touch nonetheless, and I find that it helps build the characters to have more substance, making the world more immersive. Now, while the Wolfman normally appears at your hideout after the first night, he can be encountered on the first day, as he has a camp set up in the dry meadow. He'll have the same dialogue that he has on day 2, but now he won't show up at your hideout after the first night, instead being replaced by the trader, the same person who saved you from the doctor's house in the prologue. If you don't find the Wolfman's camp on the first day, then the trader will only appear after the second night, but none of the interactions or dialogue will change, so it's no big deal. What is a big deal is that the Wolfman and the trader are able to barter with you, and have a lot of useful and valuable items that can make your life a lot easier. The trading system is pretty simple, as most items in the game have a value, so if the person who you're trading with accepts it, you can give it to them, earning you some reputation, which can then be used as a currency to buy something in return. Gaining reputation can also be done in a different way, but this method only applies to the reputation you have with the trader, as each time you survive a night, your reputation with him will increase by a set amount depending on the hideout. It's a useful mechanic that allows you to obtain otherwise non-replenishable resources consistently, and adds an incentive to not just die at night on normal mode to skip past to the next day. I mean, there's already an incentive since dying causes most normal enemies to respawn, but that isn't ever told to you, so you won't know about that. Your interaction with the Wolfman nets you the first real objective in the game, getting through to the Silent Forest and finding him at his camp there. The game has a pretty minimalistic HUD and doesn't display recently obtained objectives like this one anywhere on screen, so to track it, you'll have to look into the journal. On a small side note, for being such a useful and valuable tool, it surprised me that I wasn't able to find the game mentioning the journal or how to access it in the early stages of the game. I mean, I guess you're kind of hinted towards it when you pick up a collectible and hear the sound of pencil on paper alongside the small notification, but I only found out about the journal after looking into the control settings and seeing the keybind for it, bound to J. Anyways, the journal is what the stranger uses to record all the events and interactions he has while in the forest. The journal has a couple tabs to keep track of collectible items, skills, and keys, but the main part of the journal is the journal section. The first pages that we can read are numbered 13 and 14, with the previous pages having been torn out by the Doctor sometime in the prologue. These first two pages give us a bit of useful information to piece together this world, that being the date of roughly when the game takes place, and how the Doctor found us, since by the looks of it, before the game started, the stranger was camping in the forest with somebody and then got attacked by some savages. I don't remember anything since the attack on our camp. Somehow I'm wearing a coat, so I must have changed my clothes on the way here. I don't recognize myself anymore. I can barely hold this pencil. Has my body changed? I no longer feel hunger or thirst. What has happened to me? I remember his face, the face of the man who saved me, then held me captive. I don't know how I managed to escape his hut and end up here. What I do know is that insane fucker took my key, my only chance to get out of these woods. He also tore out all the pages from my journal. I doubt that he was able to learn the location of the underground passage, though. I should check to see if the door is still locked, just to be sure. I must find him. I don't think he still lives in the same place where he held me. Makes no difference, as I have no idea how to get back to that vile place. With that in mind, you can continue exploring the dry meadow, hoarding more resources, and also taking a peek towards the pathway leading into the Silent Forest. What you'll find there is a house, looking not too dissimilar from a regular hideout, except for the fact that it's standing in a particularly dense clump of trees that stop you from going around. Looking inside, you'll find the place infested with bug holes and worms that cover a large portion of the floor and doorways. These worms hurt when walked on, but the game nudges you towards a solution as you find all the materials required for a torch in the nearby furniture. There are a few other major points of interest in the dry meadow that you might have missed during the first day, so finding them now would be ideal as they have more resources and even some rare items. The most notable of these locations is the underground entrance, which resembles a half-destroyed house with a trapdoor leading to an underground tunnel. Entering the trapdoor, the tunnel is really dark, requiring a light source to see more than a few feet ahead of yourself. Going right, you eventually come upon a large locked metal bunker door, with the number 21 engraved on it, the same number that was seen on the key from the prologue. There's no doubt that this is where the key is meant to be used, but to do that you must first find the Doctor, and at this point the only real lead we have is the Wolfman and his request involving mutual cooperation. The tunnel has a few other things of note, including what the wiki refers to as a gaping, mutating mouth, and a path leading left from the entrance, which can be dug at, but only if you haven't explored the right side of the tunnel first. If you went to the bunker door and then started walking back to the exit, a small earthquake occurs sealing the left side, and you get chased by a previously unseen monster called a Red Chomper. If you do manage to get a shovel before exploring the tunnel, though, you'll be rewarded with a tubular magazine, long barrel, weapon parts, and 5 shotgun shells. These are very valuable items, which are useless now, but can be used in the late game to craft the pump-action shotgun, one of the best firearms in the game. The other major locations you might find in no particular order include the burned houses, crop field, and brook. There's also the wedding, but at this point you're most likely not able to access it, so I'll come back to it later. When initially found, the burned houses are overrun with dogs, which should be taken care of before you decide to loot the place. The location itself consists of 2 houses that are badly burnt and partially destroyed, with a singular red seesaw seemingly unscathed in the middle. The notable loot here is a piece of fabric, a child's white dress collectible, and a note that reads, "I know they're there. I can hear them laughing. They're behind the wall of trees. I can't get through by myself. The trees grow back too fast." It seems like a family lived here at one point, but an unfortunate fire forced them to leave. My best guess regarding the letter is that someone in the family died, and another family member, most likely a parent, wrote the letter to mourn the loss. The crop field is a much simpler location, consisting of a crop maze with a chest in the middle containing some bread, metal scrap, and a lantern, which, when equipped in the hotbar, provides a decent amount of light around you. When you start to leave the field, you'll hear some growling and will most likely run into a huge dog, a mutated and more dangerous version of the normal dog. It's very aggressive and can be difficult to kill with just a nail board, so the best approach would be to kite it in the center of the field and then retrace your path out as quickly as possible. Lastly, there's the brook, which can be found along the edge of the dry meadow and consists of a small stream penetrating the otherwise untraversable mangled tree roots that make up the map borders. Following the brook, you venture deeper into the masses of roots and eventually walk out into a small open space, vaguely resembling a room of the house that was consumed by the trees. There's a knocked over lamp on the ground, but it doesn't seem to be powered, so you follow the brook deeper to find the generator and turn it on. So far, the game hasn't really tried to explain anything, only briefly mentioning the rapidly growing forest and how the environment became isolated as a result. What we're left with is a bunch of small pieces of information, locations, and collectible items that we can find and use to build our own theories as to how and why things got this bad. I know a lot of games just choose to make pre-recorded messages or a bunch of letters and notes that more or less create the whole picture by the end, but that's not the case here. Darkwood gives you a lot of options and paths to take as you play through it, so you won't be able to find everything in one playthrough. Even looking as far as the achievements, you won't be able to get all of them in one run, and a few only give you one attempt, so chances are you'll be back on multiple occasions, learning from your mistakes and learning something new. Remember when I mentioned the oven and the skills a bit ago? Well, the first set of positive skills comes with a very interesting downside called Shadows, which is the reason for what happened at night. The Shadows perk adds an additional night event that can occur at any point during the night, and it forces you to stay near the lights, avoiding the shadows that lurk in the dark spaces of the hideout. If that wasn't bad enough, the shadows also disable all but one light source, limiting where you can stay, which becomes a big problem if you have to deal with other threats like enemies or even other stacking events. On day 3, you get to meet the trader, if you haven't already met him on day 2, that is. A man of roughly your height, he wears a thick coat and a torn sack over a large helmet that completely covers his head and neck, drowning out anything he might say. Due to this, his main method of conversing with us involves a piece of charcoal that he writes with on his thick woolen gloves and forearms. From the first interaction, he appears very friendly, and considering that he saved you from the doctor's house, we don't have any reason to suspect that he has any intentions of doing us harm. On top of that, as his name implies, he carries around a large sack filled with various goods, so he becomes your main source of various basic resources, as well as more rare items like weapon parts and other tools. At this point, you'll most likely have explored a large chunk of the meadow, so now the only real way to progress would be to venture forth into the Silent Forest. You might also be wondering about the passage from the meadow to the old woods, but going over there to investigate, you'll find the house at the bottleneck to be locked, and you only get to hear 2 people having some sort of conversation on the other side. The Silent Forest passage is a bit more interesting, as after getting past the worms, you'll have to find a new 4-digit code to unlock the metal door letting you out. You continue exploring the rest of the house to find said code, walking through a dimly lit corridor where you find a strange egg, containing an embryo inside. These embryos appear throughout the game in similar eggs, and are the only way to restore lives on the hard difficulty, giving 1 extra life per embryo you eat. Past the hallway, you re-enter the first building from the back, where you get ambushed by a stick-wielding savage. These guys are a big step up in difficulty from any of the previously encountered enemies, mainly because of how aggressive they are. They boast a considerable amount of HP at this point in the game, and have a couple different attacks of varying range, making them a potential problem in enclosed spaces or when fighting multiple enemies. After taking care of the lone savage, you're able to loot the wardrobes and other furniture, netting you with some rags, bread, pills, and a note, which just so happens to have the code. Now, this note here does what a bunch of other games do when it comes to passcodes, being addressed to an unknown person and going along the lines of, "Fine, here's the code, don't forget it." The funny part about this, though, is that the code never changes. This means that, technically, you can start a playthrough and make it to the Silent Forest and beyond on day 1, although that might not be the best idea. Right outside the code-locked door, you find a naked sleeping man, called a Sleeper, who has 2 shotgun shells and a map of the Silent Forest, which marks 2 locations on your map, the Silent Forest hideout and Piotric's house. As you walk away, he starts talking, calling you a friend and saying, "In the last hideout, look for an exit beneath the floor." It's a cryptic sentence that doesn't mean much in the moment, and it confused me a lot when I just started playing the game, but trust me, it's actually very important and gets explained by the end of the game. The main priority now is to make it to the Silent Forest hideout and start thinking about setting up for the nights, as this is where the game really starts to get serious. The way the difficulty in this game scales is by introducing new, harder enemies and then placing them in rougher and rougher environments, eventually culminating with the final biome. For now, the Silent Forest normalizes the savages and huge dogs as basic enemy types, which in combination with the generally dark forest surroundings makes exploring a lot more stressful. On top of that, white poisonous mushrooms and bear traps appear a lot more frequently now, and the bear traps pose a significant threat as stepping on one while fighting an enemy is basically a death sentence. Arriving at the Silent Forest hideout, you find most of the same stuff that was present in the previous one. Generator, sawmill, broken well, the whole deal. There's a locked crate in the small shed where the generator is, and unlocking it requires a key from a location called the Cottage, located somewhere on the edge of the Silent Forest. Looking through the main building, you can find a bike bell in the workbench, and ringing it summons the bike man, who asks you for some alcohol and in exchange offers to bring over all your items from another hideout. It's a very useful mechanic for transitioning between the different hideouts, but you should make sure to carry the alcohol on you, as if you leave some behind, he, like your average Eastern European citizen, will drink absolutely all of it and only bring back empty bottles. At this point, I acquired the wristwatch from the trader for 300 reputation, so I was able to see the current time, and seeing as it was noon, I went off to explore the forest. I was almost done cooking the second dose of the serum, so I was particularly searching for any cookable ingredients to fill the syringe, which I was able to collect after a surprise attack from a mushroom man. Going back to the hideout, I cooked the odd meat, filling the dose and picking my skill, at which moment the screen faded to black, signaling the start of the first dream sequence. You find yourself in the tunnel from the underground entrance, with nothing but a flashlight in hand for light. You start walking, following an unseen voice until you're forced to stop at the same bunker door with the number 21. You're given a single option to first press your ear against the keyhole and then look into it. You can barely make out someone's face through the small hole, but before you can do anything else, the door unlocks on its own, and the tunnel abruptly ends, now being replaced by a forest. This is the first of multiple dream sequences that you can experience, but unlike the rest, this one always occurs after you complete the second dose. The other three can appear in any order after that, with the exception of the church dream, which stops being available at a certain point in the game. There's also the dream only accessible by turning on the Indiegogo content option when starting the game, and it presents itself as the developer's office, showing concept arts and also listing all the people who supported the game in its early stages. What's cool about it is that you still play as the stranger, so interacting with all the new technology like the electric oven, he seems confused thinking it's fake. Something else worth noting is that after ending this first dream by lying in bed, you'll wake up with a shiny stone in your inventory. This goes for almost every dream, since even though they don't count you dying in them as actual deaths, they have other ways of impacting the game, like giving you items or altering the world itself. Now, I just mentioned the Silent Forest nights being more difficult a bit ago, and here's proof of that. It wasn't a particularly crazy night, but seeing as I only had the nail board, the savages had the upper hand, especially considering that I ended up fighting them in such a small space. Luckily, I had pills on me, which just so happened to be the most busted healing item in the game, so I barely managed to survive. Waiting out the last moments of the night, the familiar, comforting droning sound slowly faded in, and the sun rose over the forest, lighting everything in a bright red, until finally, the screen went white, signifying the dawn of a new day. To some it might seem overly dramatic, and even out of place at times, as the nights can be completely docile, with not a single enemy or night event to speak of, but I find this sequence extremely gratifying, making each night survived feel like an accomplishment no matter the difficulty. I'll talk about this more later, but the nights can be very unpredictable, and the end of night sequence is the only real constant, so it becomes the thing you look forward to as you hold out against whatever the game throws your way. It's just done so well from beginning to end, and when it is done, you get to experience the only real safe moment in the game, when time is frozen and you hear that calming morning music fade in as you go to talk with the trader. Speaking of the trader, he continues to appear every morning regardless of the hideout, but talking to him for the first time in the Silent Forest, he doesn't seem all too happy. He seems to disapprove of us progressing through the game and looking for the key, telling us that there's no way out of here, brother. It's a bit confusing to see him attempting to persuade us from trying to escape the forest, since otherwise he seems to only have good intentions. Of course, he might know something we don't, but in that case, why doesn't he just tell us? The Silent Forest, while being more dangerous, is also a lot richer in terms of locations, set pieces, and resources compared to the Dry Meadow, and as a result tends to be the biome where you'll spend the most time. On top of that, most of the questlines in Chapter 1 basically start here, so you'll be doing a lot of exploring around these parts if you decide to do everything you can. As for now, the only quest you have is to find the Wolfman at his camp, so you'll probably do that, or go explore the other newly learned location, Piotric's house. Approaching the residence, it becomes clear that there are actually two separate buildings, partially surrounded by barricades and fencing, with a large junk pile out in the front. The large building, resembling a garage, is partially infested with the same floor worms, and the smaller building, the actual house, is where you'll find the lone resident. Trying to open the metal door, the person will ask that you take care of the beast lurking in the garage before he lets you in, so you go and do that, killing the beast that turns out to be a normal dog. An eccentric tinkerer, you find him wearing a wireframe hat with two curly antennae, a dark long-sleeve shirt, dirty overalls, a bag, and multiple watches on his left wrist. Talking to him, it quickly becomes obvious that he's obsessed with space, and showing him the plastic chick, he tells you about the construction out front, saying that he's building a rocket, but still needs a few parts before it's ready. Besides the dialogue, you can also trade with him and buy most of the same stuff that the trader sells. One exception to this, though, is the alcohol, which only he has a replenishable supply of, so he's a very useful character if you plan on using a lot of Molotovs, which, by the way, are insanely strong. After speaking to Piotrek, you now have a new quest available to you, which is to find the missing parts he needs to finish building his rocket. There's a blueprint which can be found in the garage's back room where the dog was, containing a crude drawing for all the different rocket parts there are. Chances are you've probably already seen at least a few of these, since all of them are basic car parts like tires, steering wheels, or exhaust pipes, which are found in various broken down vehicles around the map. These items are easy to distinguish from the normal loot, and you'll need to find 4 of the 6 parts and then show them to Piotrek in order to finish the quest. Giving Piotrek all the necessary items, he's able to finish building his spaceship, and returning to his house sometime later, no sign of him nor the rocket will be found. The other way the quest can go is if you start it, giving Piotrek at least one of the items, and then go talk to the Wolfman, showing him one of the 6 car parts. For whatever reason, the Wolfman despises Piotrek and thinks it a good idea to sabotage the guy by turning a car part into a bomb before giving it to him. Doing this will result in the rocket exploding and killing Piotrek as a result, and you'll be left with neither his resources from trading, nor a reward from the Wolfman. In either scenario, Piotrek is taken out of the picture, so trading with him isn't a possibility anymore, and honestly, it's just sad seeing him go. Of course, you can always just ignore the quest, and that's actually what I recommend doing here, as I find his trades to be much more useful than either of the other outcomes. Going to meet with the Wolfman, he acts surprised that you actually showed up, but since you did, he goes ahead and tells you what he needs from you, and that is to go to the nearby village and find the hag that reeks of chickens, who apparently has a key that belongs to him. Again, he isn't being very specific, but he's the best lead we have, and seeing as he knows that we're after a key ourselves, it seems like a fair request. Continuing to talk to him, he will reveal another job for you. This one also involves the village, as it turns out they have a pig shed in the Silent Forest where they keep their sow that provides them with food. The Wolfman sees the villagers as selfish and wants to teach them a lesson by having you kill the sow, promising some sort of treasure in return. After the conversation, you're left with the general location of the village, which you'll know you found when you approach a crumbling paved road that leads towards the edge of the Silent Forest. From here, you'll notice 2 things. 1, the time has stopped, and 2, the map doesn't work. Both of these observations tie into the fact that the village is an event location, which is basically any location outside the main zone. None of these places have randomized layouts, and are generally important to the story, so it wouldn't be all that cool if whatever this is came after you while you were talking to a character. Now that I mentioned characters, there's still one important note to be made about them. To put it simply, all of them can die. This is something that gets hinted at by the fact that when mousing over a character, a red health bar, identical to the one enemies have, appears at the bottom of the screen. It's something that I haven't seen done in any other game, since most of the time there exist certain characters that end up being vital to a game's progression, so the game has to make them invincible to avoid players messing things up.
Dad, please.
Darkwood doesn't care, and instead puts all the responsibility in your hands, as when you kill someone, they stay dead for the rest of the playthrough. This ties back to the point I made when covering the prologue when I mentioned the fact that most of your actions leave an impact on the world, and this is a prime example of just how far the game takes that idea. Anyways, the fact that time doesn't move in the village should tell you that you should explore every nook and cranny, as otherwise you'll be spending more time outside of a completely safe location, fighting savages and huge dogs to make ends meet. Besides, most houses in the village are unlocked, allowing you to just walk in and rinse the inhabitants of all their belongings with minimal effort. Speaking of the inhabitants, most aren't all too pleased seeing a strange outsider like you walking around their village, so any attempt to talk or otherwise interact with them will usually be met with a curt, unfriendly response and no option for further conversation. The stranger remarks how the villagers don't seem all too happy seeing you here, and while they aren't outright hostile, that could be only because you're armed, and they currently aren't. The village itself isn't all that pleasant either. There's a constant droning sound that plays while you're here, identical to the one that plays during the night, making you feel uneasy. Exploring the place, everything feels dull, something that gets reflected in how the people are living and even in the colors themselves, which are all washed out and desaturated. It's a discomforting feeling, as something is obviously wrong here, but we, as the outsider, remain completely clueless, not knowing what that something is. The chicken lady is who the wolfman was referring to when he told you about the village and his key, but upon your first interaction, you don't get to learn anything about it from her. Gossiping with her, she doesn't say anything important either, mentioning the Sow and somebody named Hanuska. Showing her the plastic chick, on the other hand, you get a much more interesting response. As it turns out, the plastic chick belonged to Janik, the chicken lady's brother and the guy we killed in the prologue. According to her, Janik recently ran away from the village and went off to see somebody, that somebody being the doctor, whose photo we are given. With a new bit of information on the doctor acquired, we attempt to stop the conversation, only to be interrupted by the noise of somebody struggling to play on a violin outside. Going to investigate the noise, you see a boy playing on his violin, but upon approaching him, he gets scared and hides under the nearby tractor. Talking to the musician, he starts apologizing profusely for his music, before quickly switching topics and asking us if we've seen the pretty lady, who the chicken lady locked in the room with the boarded-up window. He seems odd, watching the pretty lady through the window, wishing to marry her, and even trying to find a key to the locked door, which he assumes to be at Janik's house. He wasn't able to find a way inside it, though, and asks you to find the key, directing you to the village well that he suspects might have something to do with this, as he saw Janik near it on multiple occasions. He tells you that he'll be hiding in the old silo in the Silent Forest, and asks that you bring him the key after finding it. Now, we have a bit of a dilemma, as both the wolfman and the musician seemingly want the same key, the key to the pretty lady's room. With that in mind, the next order of business becomes finding the well, and then repairing it with a chain so that you can descend into it. There's two ways to obtain a chain, either by finding an uncharred corpse in the southeasternmost village house, or by buying it from Piotrek, if you haven't killed him already. After repairing the well, you can descend down, under the village, into a dark maze-like tunnel network. There's a backpack near the entrance with a torch and 2 flares, which comes in handy as you start to explore, passing over strange drawings of stick figures and random shapes, going deeper and deeper. Eventually, you'll run into the single inhabitant of these tunnels, a small red chomper which you can either kill or run away from, circling around it to reach the end of the tunnels. Once you're out, you'll find yourself back in the village in a previously unexplored house. Janik's house. Searching through it, you'll find the coveted key on a shelf in the entrance room, where you'll also be able to unbarricade the front door, allowing you to leave. With the key in your possession, you now have a decision to make. Give the key to either the wolfman or musician, or use it yourself. Yeah, it's not a pretty sight. At this point, we don't know what happened to her, but whatever it was, the chicken lady, who is her sister, seemed to have a good reason to keep her locked up, caring for her while not letting anyone else see her. She seems to be in pain, so you'd assume the best course of action would be to end her suffering yourself, but that would cause the Wolfman and the musician to get mad at you, stunting their quest lines and forcing you to kill the chicken lady to proceed, so I'd recommend against it. Now, the key doesn't actually get used up when you open the door to the pretty lady's room, so you can still give it to one of the two characters and proceed with her questline. Taking the key to the Wolfman, he's still as scummy and brash as ever, and although he gives you the doctor's location, you won't be able to reach him as he locked himself away. Now you need a new code, but the Wolfman wraps the conversation up, telling you the general part of the old woods where he'll be residing from now on, and inviting you over. He also throws you a severed chicken head, addressing it to the chicken lady as a thank you for her beautiful sister, and disappearing as you pick it up off the ground. Oppositely, you can go to the silo, the general location of which was given to you by the musician during your first chat. Here you'll find the musician himself, who doesn't look all too healthy, but seems quite normal, wearing some plain clothes and a small mask given to him by the doctor. He happily takes the key, thanking you, but then asks you for another favor, requiring you to also go into the old woods to find his parents' house where you'll find his mom's violin, which he wants. The problem is, apparently his mom is upset with him for whatever reason, so he gives you a drawing he made and tells you to deliver it to her in the hopes that she'll allow you to borrow the violin. In return, he says he'll try to set you up with an appointment with the doctor, seeing as you look pretty sickly. With both main quest lines requiring you to go to the old woods, I find this to be the perfect time to explore the Silent Forest more and just grind your gear. At this point, you'll probably have your workbench upgraded a few tiers, so you'll be able to get yourself a shovel in place of the nail board, and maybe even get a pistol or shotgun to go along with it. All the parts for the pistol can actually be found in the Silent Forest: gun parts and tape in the village, and handgun frame at a savage-infested campsite somewhere on the main map. It's a good mid-game weapon with average damage and the obvious range factor that all firearms have. With 8 bullets per mag, it takes care of one-on-one fights easily, but starts to struggle against multiple enemies unless you can outrange them and pick them off before things get too close. What is this? Holy shit, dude. Just like in other games, the pistol is reliable for the most part, and has pretty common ammunition, so it remains useful throughout the game. Something that I noticed about the combat in this game, and the weapons in general, is that you never feel completely safe and out of danger. Even having firearms, axes, molotovs, and bear traps prepared for the night, the tension partially comes from the fear of the unknown, and the fact that you don't always know what can happen. Every single time I played, I encountered unique night cycles with different night events and enemies, and as a result, I was never completely confident in surviving the night, partially because I already knew how easily you can die from a single slip-up. One of the best examples of this was when I spent a night in the mostly safe Dry Meadow hideout, and then this happened. Banshees are an enemy that, at this point in the game, can only be encountered at night, and usually only appear in the later hideouts. They are absolutely terrifying when first encountered, capable of cutting your lights and spawning smaller swarmer enemies on death, so for one to appear in the beginner zone is very unexpected. That being said, the game gives you plenty of opportunity to thrive in the various environments, as there are many different ways to approach a lot of the challenges that get thrown your way. Obviously, the nights can get very dangerous with the various enemies and night events, but there's a lot you can do to mitigate and prevent these threats. Take for example a regular bottle, which you can throw, causing it to shatter into glass shards that now damage enemies who step over him. Or take a gasoline can and pour it onto the ground to create a trail of flammable liquid that can be ignited with a thrown match to burn incoming enemies. Combine the gasoline with an explosive barrel and a bear trap, and now you have a remote detonator that you can set off when you hear the bear trap trigger. Of course, none of this is told to you by the game and requires you to ask the questions and experiment yourself, but just the fact that it is possible adds so much depth and variety to the gameplay. It's yet another distinguishing factor that sets this game apart from the other survival horror titles, as it lets you tackle the obstacles in a multitude of various ways, most of which I haven't even mentioned. Continuing with exploring the Silent Forest, there's still the pig shed which the Wolfman told us about. It's one of the biggest locations in the game, so finding it isn't all that difficult, but if you need the exact location, you can find a map for it in the village barn. With the location now discovered, you can go over there, but depending on where it is, it might be faster to use the holes to reach it. You see, in the village, to the right of the repaired well, there's a small clearing with a bunch of dug holes, one of which is occupied by someone. Inspecting the largest hole, the stranger remarks how it seems to be dug by hand, and then interacting with the hole, you'll find yourself right next to the Silent Forest hideout. This is the game's version of the fast travel system, which, when discovered at the village, allows you to go back and forth between it and the hideout with no penalty. Approaching the pig shed, there's 3 buildings, 2 smaller ones and 1 main L-shaped shed where the sow is located. There's a lot of barricades surrounding the pig shed, limiting your entrance points into the main area and separating one of the smaller buildings, forcing you to go around the outside to reach it. Going to where the sow is, there's 2 men outside the shed, who can be overheard talking about someone who got killed by the sow after someone else cut some sort of cable. Getting close to them, they'll get mad and pull out a pitchfork and a nail board to scare you off. Killing the guy with the pitchfork, he'll drop it, and I guess it's an okay alternative to the shovel, trading damage for even more reach, but suffering from low durability. It also has the unique ability to get stuck in walls during attacks, which I find pretty funny. Inside the shed, you'll find the sow, a huge mutated pig that grew to a point where it can't support its own weight or move around, so it's stuck lying on its side while the villagers feed it so it can produce pigs for food. With the goal being to kill it, most of us will try to melee it, only to find out that's not an option, as getting close it'll kick you, dealing damage and stunning you. As such, killing it by hand requires either a firearm or Molotovs, but considering the health pool it would be a big waste, so you're better off looking for an alternative, which can be found in the building out back. Upon entering it, the first thing that sticks out is the lever contraption, but until you turn on the power, there isn't anything you can do with it. Going further, you run into another villager, sitting on a cot in the main room, and past him in the back is where you'll find the generator and a broken mirror, which you can interact with. There is only one place in the entire game where you can see yourself from a first-person perspective, and it just so happens to be through a broken mirror. The version of the stranger you see is skewed and broken himself, spiteful and uncaring of the people around him, capable of hurting and even killing others with no remorse. It's clear that the forest already had its toll on the stranger, maybe not in the same way as the other characters or enemies, but he definitely isn't the same man as he was back where he came from. You're one ugly bastard. I guess you got what you deserved. After turning the generator on and returning to the lever, you're able to read the attached note, through which you learn that the villagers devised a way to feed the sow by immobilizing it with a controlled shock which allowed the feeder to give it food in 15-second intervals. The note also mentions the lock present on the lever, which stops it from being placed in the down position past the acceptable voltage level. It's pretty obvious what's intended from us here, but attempting to administer the lethal shock now won't work, as the wires leading from the lever to the inside of the shed are cut. Inspecting the wires outside, you're able to repair them, but that requires a cable which can only be obtained in two ways, either by buying one from Piotrek or by killing someone named Hanuska in the village. It's understandable as to why Piotrek would sell a cable, but why would a random villager have one as well? Hanuska was mentioned by the chicken lady, who told you that she gave birth to an abomination which resulted in the villagers taking it away and burning her house down, killing her husband in the process. Looking for it, there is in fact a burned house in the village, where you can find Hanuska sitting next to a small container. Looking into the container, you can find a small burned doll, one that looks extremely similar to the doll that can be found if you kill the small chomper in the well below the village. This leads to the conclusion that this small red chomper is Hanuska's child, who was taken away to an unknown place by the villagers. With how Hanuska was treated, it would make sense that she hates the villagers now, and to get back at them, she cut the cables, which resulted in the sow killing the pig farmer and forcing the village into starvation. Going further, after taking the doll from the container, Hanuska will tell you, kill the pig, and killing her, she drops a knife and the cable that she cut. Now, the situation in the village makes more sense, as people are literally sick from starvation. It's gotten so bad that it appears they even started looking at cannibalism as a potential alternative, a speculation that is supported by the crematorium and adjacent house that is full of dead bodies and has a kitchen where you can find a meat grinder and multiple jars of meat.
If I chop you up in a meat grinder...
Returning to the pig shed after obtaining the cable, you can repair the wires and power the lever again. This time the electric shock does go through, and going back inside the shed, the sow is dead. Now, there's a funny interaction to be had with the Wolfman if you fix the wires, then go talk to him before killing the sow. I've heard someone took pity on the poor villagers and fixed the cables in the pig shed. Some good soul, an angel of sorts, probably crawled out of the ground. People like that haven't been seen in these parts for a long time. The wolf pierces me with his look and grins. A string of saliva lands on his hole-riddled jacket. Deer meat. The wolf puts his paw on me. I can feel his claws puncturing my skin. If the cables are fixed, then be so kind as to move your fucking ass and finish the job. You just need to tweak the machine a little bit in order to silence the unbearable whining of that pathetic sow. You can do that much, can you? It's great, but sadly this dialogue usually gets missed by players since after fixing the wires you can go kill the sow right away with no need to do anything else. Anyways, with the sow quest done, you can return to the Wolfman, who goes giddy after hearing the news, slapping you on the cheek and all that. He mocks the villagers, betting that they'll try to break through the trees in an attempt to find food, sad that he can't wallow in their despair. With that, he gives you the treasure he promised, which turns out to be a hotbar upgrade. Now, the thing with inventory and hotbar upgrades is that you can only craft a certain number of them, limiting your theoretical max capacity. This doesn't mean you can't use more though, so getting this hotbar upgrade from the Wolfman, you raise your hotbar slot count by one additional slot, which is pretty nice. There's one more thing that can be done regarding the sow quest, and it requires you to go over to the village a day after the sow died, where you'll find that the villagers managed to bring it over on a wagon and are now crying over it. Going through the village past the mayor's house, you'll find a man sitting near the corner, and approaching, he'll call out to you, telling you that the mayor wants to speak to you. It's obvious that nothing good will come from this, but curiosity gets the better of you and you enter the house and then descend down into the cellar. Just like shotguns in any other video game, Darkwood continues the trend by giving them the ability to one-shot pretty much every enemy in the game. It's fair since they feel very powerful, with even the screen shake being so high that it feels like a momentary flashbang with how disoriented it makes me. The only downside of the shotgun, like any of the firearms except for the pistol, is that it has very scarce ammo, with traders only selling one shotgun shell a day, making it impossible to use the shotgun for all encounters. The Silent Forest leads into the old woods via a wooden bridge built over a now mostly dried up river. Off to the side of the bridge there's an abandoned truck crashed into the riverbed containing a pistol mag, exhaust pipe for Piotrek, and a data sheet that the stranger states is a population list. Passing to the old woods along the riverbed isn't possible due to a fallen tree and a steep riverbank on the opposite side, so you'll have to use the bridge where you find a sleeping red chomper. Similarly to the Savage and the Silent Forest Gateway, the game officially introduces the red chompers through a quote-unquote mandatory encounter, forcing you to fight it to proceed. Even after putting over 50 hours into the game, red chompers are one of the enemies that I dread fighting, especially at night. Mutated humans that got split down the middle, forming a huge teeth-filled maw which they use to attack, they are extremely aggressive and agile, capable of sprinting and charging at you, which makes losing them or gaining distance very difficult. They deal considerable damage and have a lot of health themselves, taking 5 pistol shots to kill, so your best bet would be to lure them into a bear or chain trap first. Molotovs are a great alternative, although they won't die from the initial explosion and require a few seconds afterwards to completely burn up. If close range is the only option, then the best bet would be to kite them and wait for the charge attack, which can be punished with a melee swing. Killing a chomper this way, though, can result in it potentially splitting, with the torso and head still alive and dangerous, so an extra hit will be necessary to put it down for good. After killing the chomper, most likely as it's waking up, or running past it, you enter the Old Woods, the final and most dangerous biome of Chapter 1. Unlike the Dry Meadow or Silent Forest, here it's not instantly obvious where the hideout is located, as previously you either started in one or quickly found the map telling you the location. Finding the hideout here requires either searching manually for it, which can take time and lead to more chomper encounters, or by buying the Old Woods map from Piotrek, that is, if he's still alive. The map costs 100 reputation, which isn't too bad considering the fact that you get 100 reputation each time you give Piotrek a car part, so I'd say it's worth it. The Old Woods hideout is a lot more different from the other two, as approaching it looks more like a maze, with various rooms, doorways, and walls separating the space into distinct pathways. Also, unlike the other two hideouts, this one consists entirely out of one building, with the generator and workbench on the inside, and the sawmill and broken well outside on either side of the building. Going inside, there's the usual furniture, with some high-quality items like pistol mags, gun parts, welders for upgrading the workbench, and also a collectible note titled Desertion 1. Based on the title, the note is most likely written by military personnel, talking about how they are getting assigned someone while being in the forest. The note then goes on to talk about one of the group members named Maciek, who seems to have started going crazy, rambling about his family members, something that started annoying the others. After a while, the person writing the note realized that Maciek disappeared, taking a bunch of supplies like water and a gun, alongside a flamethrower, but leaving his hazard suit behind. Considering where the note is found, I think it's safe to assume that these people, again most likely military personnel wielding weapons, flamethrowers, and hazard suits, use these hideouts for the same reason that you are. Going further, it could be that the stranger is one of these guys, maybe not from the same group, but why else would he be camping here and using the oven at night? If this was true, it would also explain the stranger's proficiency with a lot of weapons, being able to create various armaments and firearms that he then knows how to wield fluently without any training. Spending a night in the Old Woods, and then talking to the trader in the morning, he is even more worried about you. Visibly struggling, the man drops the sack off his back and bends in half, as if out of breath. He shakes the dust off his clothes and rolls up the sleeve of his seemingly too small jacket. I see some new words written on his forearm. The forest wants to devour you. You're heading straight into its jaws. The phrasing is strange, but the more you think about it, the more it would make sense, seeing as the forest seems to be literally alive, growing rapidly and trapping people inside it. Still, at this point it's obvious the trader knows more than he's letting on, but he doesn't say anything else. Maybe because he trusts you enough, hoping you'll understand without an extra explanation. If you've been using the ovens for cooking, then you'll be happy to know that the Old Woods are a prime spot for acquiring a lot of hallucinogens like mushrooms or odd meat, which drop from literally every enemy here. If you also consider that the oven in this hideout has an efficiency rating of 16, meaning it extracts 16 times the base essence per ingredient, then this is where you'll probably do most of the cooking. As a result, you're basically bound to reach another dream sequence, and if we ignore the supporter dream, then that leaves us with three possible options: the grave, the church, and the apartment. The grave dream is the simplest one out of the three, and takes place in an isolated clearing with a dug-up empty grave and a dead man lying next to it. Approaching the grave, the dead man starts talking, inviting you to lie down in the hole, which, when done, ends the dream sequence. Alternatively, you can continue standing, in which case the music will start to shift to a more menacing tone, with the same whispers from the prologue fading in again. Flocks of crows start flying overhead, and as you look away, the corpse disappears, being replaced by a black chomper that starts attacking you. Black chompers are ruthless, being stronger than a red chomper, but they only appear in dream sequences as a sort of lose condition that you have to avoid, or in some cases kill. Next to the grave, you'll find a hard-to-notice shovel, which you can pick up to kill the chomper or die trying. In either case, you'll wake up, just like if you lie down in the grave, but killing the chomper rewards you with a shovel blade, so when getting this dream, there's no harm in trying to go for the kill. The church dream takes place at the ruins of a church, an actual location found in the old woods. Passing by a large bell and through the church gates, you approach the ruins where a lone man is standing, telling you to get in line as you pass. Approaching the back of the church, there's a locked trap door, and getting close to it, the edges of the screen darken as a black, writhing mass slowly fades over it. You hear a multitude of voices behind you, and turning around, you catch a glimpse of a group of people all lined up to enter the basement. There's a chest right next to the trap door containing a single lockpick, which comes in handy to unlock the left door, leading into an adjacent small room. In there, you find a wardrobe with a damaged axe and a strange scratched lockbox. Picking it up, you hear a now familiar inhuman scream, and another black chomper appears, repeating the same few lines over and over. A red seesaw, a white dress, a black box, for my girls. In total, there are three ways the dream can end, with you either killing or getting killed by the black chomper, or by breaking through the side door and escaping the chomper out of the church. This third ending is not one that I ever even thought of, since I saw the axe as a weapon against the chomper and didn't even think about breaking down the side door with it. On top of that, escaping the church and getting killed by the chomper leads to the same result, so again, getting this dream, it's always best to attempt to go for the chomper, as there aren't any downsides to doing so. Finally, we have the apartment dream, which is my favorite out of the 4 serum dreams, and to show you why, I'll just let it play out itself. There's a reason as to why I wanted to make a video on this game, and this dream is a big part of that. The way the game sets everything up, with you waking up and going to explore the apartment as the sun rises lighting the street below, while the calming morning music lulls you into a feeling of security. Then, all of that gets taken away in an instant, as the whole world goes dark and silent, except for the rhythmic, persistent ticking of the clock and the stranger knocking on your door outside. It's exactly what I meant when I talked about horror with no jump scares in the very beginning. There isn't anything inherently terrifying about this, no distorted faces or anything that instantly kicks in your fight or flight, but even rewatching this myself, I can't help but get goosebumps. The apartment dream, unlike the rest, doesn't have any impact on the game afterwards. No items to be found in your inventory and no changes to the world, unlike the church dream. Instead, this dream gives us a rare and brief look into the stranger's life prior to the events of the game, living in an apartment building with presumably his wife. I think this dream is more personal to the stranger, him reminiscing about himself in the past when he lived a normal life, but he knows there's nothing he can do about that now, hence the abrupt blackout and him confronting his current self, standing outside the apartment door. There's actually two other ways you can end this dream, both requiring to go outside the apartment without looking at your current self, and then either going down the dark hallway or finding a hidden door leading to a strange room with a TV. Both of these endings also lack an impact, and they make less sense, but I think that it's the stranger trying to, unsuccessfully, ignore or escape the present, instead wishing to stay in his fantasy just a bit longer, which I can't say I blame him. Now, back to the church dream, which I just mentioned has an impact on the real game world. When waking up, the first thing you'll notice is the presence of the Wolfman, unless you killed him, who, when talked to, remarks on the fact that you just had a dream. Choosing to show him an item, you'll probably also notice the lockbox from the dream, and showing it to him, he'll get excited, examining it all around, and telling you that if you find the key to it, you should bring it to him so that he can open it. Now, the big deal with the church dream is the changes it has on the church location in the old woods. When exploring it for the first time, you'll notice how the church ruins are a one-to-one of the church in the dream, with the exception of the loot, which consists of a shovel blade and an electronic game collectible. This console can also be shown to the Wolfman, and if you go along with his conversation, nodding at his questions, he'll give you an empty pistol. Nice, but probably redundant at this point in the game. The church ruins also has a code-locked trapdoor that, before the dream, can only be unlocked by guessing the code. After you do experience the dream though, depending on if you killed the chomper or not, you'll either find a man sitting in front of the trapdoor, or he'll be dead, with a medallion on his body, and the trapdoor will be open. If the chomper got you, then after inspecting the trapdoor, the man will say the code, telling you to go down there where you belong. What interested me was that killing the black chomper results in the man being dead, and with the fact that the church dream is nearly identical to the real location, it could be possible that the dream is actually a hallucination. My logic behind this is that black chompers appear elsewhere, but only in dreams, so it's plausible that they aren't really chompers, but humans, that the stranger perceives as chompers due to just having taken a dose of the serum. So far, we've seen black chompers in a few other places, mainly the prologue at the very end where we get injected with something by the doctor, which led us to perceiving reality differently, down to not even seeing the door to the doctor's study. The grave and the church chomper also share a different similarity, in that they actually speak, something that reminds me more of an actual human compared to a chomper which can't speak at all. Furthermore, the church chomper talks about his girls, a white dress and a red seesaw, which we found in the burned houses in the meadow, and the man at the church location also mentions his girls, which heavily implies that this is the father of the family who lived in the burned house. With the code, you can now unlock the trapdoor and descend into the church basement, which, just like the church, is impacted by the dream. Normally, if you didn't kill the black chomper, then the cellar is home to 5 dormant red chompers, which can be found lying among the few other bloated corpses. They aren't affected by you walking around them, remaining asleep, but as soon as you attack one of them or turn on the radio found at the very back of the basement, they will all wake up, leading to a very dangerous and tense fight. Instead, if you manage to kill the black chomper, you won't find any red chompers, as the cellar will be filled with a pack of huge dogs. In either case, there's only one item of interest here, a twisted key which can either be found near the radio or in one of the huge dogs that presumably ate it by accident. Now, the first time I attempted to reach the cellar, I failed to kill the black chomper, so I had to deal with the hard basement variant. What ensued was that after triggering the chompers near the entrance, I ended up accidentally leaving the basement around 10 times because the basement stairs hitbox was way too large, so I wasn't able to properly fight any of the chompers. I had a shotgun with me, so eventually I was able to one-shot a few of them, and after that, I had enough room to kill the other 2 and then loot the key from the back. As expected, you aren't able to use the key to open the box yourself, so finding the Wolfman is required if you want the contents. At this point, if you haven't given him the key to the pretty lady's room, then there's no problem, but if you did, then you'll have to search for him in the old woods, at a location called the Barn Ruins. The location itself isn't hard to find, as it's always generated in a distinctly shaped part of the old woods, but actually traversing it can be quite painful. The whole place is completely overrun by both types of dogs that you'll be running into as you try to find your way around the place. Eventually, I was able to pick off the multiple huge dogs around the center of the barn, and after squeezing through a small gap between some tree roots and a wall, I entered a small house at the back, where the Wolfman was staying. Showing the Wolfman the key, he gets very excited and frantically attempts to open the box, but upon doing so is disappointed, thinking you're playing some sort of trick on him. He throws the contents of the box at you, a few pieces of paper with some childish drawings and a shiny stone. The 7 drawings, when viewed in order, tell the story of 2 girls, how they lived in the woods with their dad, how their dog died after eating a red mushroom, how their dad repurposed the doghouse into a red seesaw, and how their house burnt down, forcing them to go to the church basement for shelter. Now, the note in the burned houses makes more sense, as the father, most likely the guy at the church ruins, seems to have gone mad, cursing the forest for taking his 2 daughters away from him. If you met with the Wolfman at the barn ruins, then you're already going along with his questline, because speaking to him here for the first time, he'll be ecstatic, for a reason we might be anticipating but can't be sure about yet. Right away, you're given 2 options as the Wolfman approaches you, either to push him away or do nothing as he starts licking your face, thanking you for helping him get his girl. If you do push him away, he seems taken aback to see you standing up for yourself, almost putting him in his place, and as a result, he won't give you a hunting rifle that he would have given you if you just let him thank you. After that little interaction, in both cases, the Wolfman tells you that he'll be able to take you to the doctor's house, where you might find some clues about his current location. Beyond that, the Wolfman doesn't want anything else to do with you, and suggests you dis-a-fucking-peer from his part of the woods once you've found the key. Before taking the Wolfman up on that offer, though, one more room in his hideout remains, right next to him, and going inside, we find the pretty lady, half-eaten and dead. It's not a pretty sight, but considering what she must have been going through as she mutated into an abomination, I guess it could be considered a mercy killing. The other alternative is to give the key to the musician, in which case the pretty lady doesn't leave her room in the village and continues to suffer, as the musician ends up getting carried away by a different situation that you were responsible for creating. You see, back in the Silent Forest, after giving him the key, the musician tasks you with finding his parents' home in the old woods, where you'll locate his mom's violin, which he needs before going to see the pretty lady. Finding the house, it's partially barricaded on the outside, and coming in from the front, there's a small separate outhouse off to the side. Entering the house, there's roots growing over the floor, and the generator is almost empty, so it seems like the musician's parents are, well, at least half dead. Going further in, the house looks long abandoned, with roots growing through the floorboards, while the creaking sounds give off the feeling that the whole place will collapse at any moment. The music swells as you move deeper into the house, reaching the bath where you find the musician's mom lying in the tub. There's a few notable items here, including a watch and a military flashlight, but the violin, the reason why you're here in the first place, is hidden behind the wardrobe. Finding the violin, the mom asks you not to take it, saying that you'll pay, but you have no choice, so you take it anyway and start to leave, only to hear a thud coming from up ahead, followed by a chomper's scream. As it turns out, both the musician's parents were sick and turned into red chompers after you took the violin, forcing you to either kill them or run away far enough to lose their aggro. In the end, what matters is that you get the violin and give it to the musician, who instantly lightens up, asking us if his mom enjoyed the drawing he made. Oh yeah, I completely forgot about that. The drawing actually serves a purpose here, as giving it to the musician's mom before taking the violin, neither of the parents will turn into chompers, allowing you to avoid the danger. That, or you can just kill the parents before they turn, which also mitigates the chomper issue ahead of time. In any case, satisfied, the musician tells you to visit him sometime at his parents' house, since they aren't mad at him anymore, seeing as they let you borrow the violin. In the meantime, he helps you to get closer to the doctor by actually setting up that appointment he promised and telling you where the doctor can be found. Visiting the musician's parents' house the day after giving him the violin, depending on your choices from earlier, you'll see one of two things. Either the musician will be standing outside the house with 2 graves dug in front of him, or you'll find his dead body inside, killed by his parents who ended up turning into chompers regardless of the drying. Killing the parents, you unknowingly saved the musician, but he still blames you and you end up not being able to speak to him. In both cases, you're meant to feel bad about your actions, wondering if doing the opposite would have led to a better result, but no matter what, both outcomes end the musician's quest line, and you have no choice but to move on, feeling worse than before. With the musician's path being complete, at least for now, we turn our attention back to the Wolfman and his offer. Accepting his service, we find ourselves in a previously unexplored event location, leaving which brings us back to the old woods. Following the path, we pass by a house, part of which has been completely removed by a root-filled ravine. Up ahead, past some barricades and bear traps, we see another building, lined with beds, some of which are occupied. Looking into the second room of this building, there's a man halted in the corner, who starts talking as you approach him, asking where the doctor is and then rambling about something before mentioning that he has a horrible headache, feeling like his head is about to explode at any moment. Exiting the building, you'll approach the familiar doctor's house, which can now be fully explored. Entering through an unbarricaded window at the back, the house is in disarray, as it seems like after the doctor fled and you barely got saved by the traitor, nobody returned here. Looking outside, you'll find the dog from the prologue, either dead or mutated depending on if you mercy killed it, and past that you'll run into an impassable thicket of trees that the doctor mentioned at the very start. Back inside, the same containers are present, with the chest in the generator room now containing a previously unseen item called Odd Stone. This item can only be found at this location, and seems to have been tied to a now removed potion crafting mechanic. By the looks of it, these potions would have been used similarly to the hotbar in inventory upgrades, allowing you to increase your health and stamina bars, but the feature ended up getting removed at some point in the alpha, with this odd stone being the only remaining trace. The one difference about this house now is the large room with the cages, where the carpet has been pulled back to reveal a code-locked floor compartment. Following the scratch line leading from it across the floor, you find 4 numbers, which, when placed in the right order, make up the correct code. Inside this compartment, there are 2 useful pieces of paper and a completely useless toy rocket, which has a decent value but can't be traded with anyone, probably another item left unimplemented. The map gives you the location of the doctor's hideout, the same one that the musician told you about, and the note gives you the code to unlock it. Now having found what you're looking for, there isn't much left to do here, so you leave, jumping back out the window and passing through the health facility when the guy sitting in the corner calls out to you, telling you to kill him so that you can take his house. Doing what he says, he'll drop a key, which can be used to open the previously locked door at that partially ruined house near the ravine, where you'll find a corpse with an axe. With that, the Wolfman's questline also comes to an end, and now all that's left to do is get to the doctor and find the key. Looking back for a moment, it's obvious that siding with the Wolfman for this quest makes a lot more sense. In the end, both you and the Wolfman stay happy getting what you want, but if you side with the musician, no matter the outcome, you'll get little to no reward, and the musician will end up suffering. I personally sided with the musician on my first playthrough, thinking that helping him out and making him happy would be better than working for the Wolfman, but Darkwood showed once again just how cruel and unforgiving this world really is. With either the Wolfman or musician's questline completed, you learn the doctor's location, a train wreck located in the old woods. Now all that's left to do is get over there and interrogate the doctor to find out where he's hiding the key, although, depending on the questline you took, doing that will be easier said than done. The problem is, if you went along with the musician, you end up getting punished again, as the doctor anticipates your arrival and traps you inside the train car before filling it with a sleeping gas. You come to in a similar situation as the prologue, tied and in the process of being interrogated by the doctor. Seeing him up close, he doesn't look too good, dirty and anxious, holding a lit cigarette with his shaking right hand. His shirt looks baggy and stained with sweat. The boy accidentally set you up. The doctor doesn't try to hide his amusement. He mentioned you'd like to make an appointment. As you can see, I've found you just in time. Unfortunately, you won't be able to thank him for it. His face suddenly stiffens. I've waited for you, you rotten dog. You're a rare breed here. Your kind visits us whenever you please. You hide behind the trees, watch us from a distance, and then disappear. I can feel the doctor's cold hand grab me by the jaw, twisting my inert head so he can look me straight into my eyes. Luckily for me, something went wrong. Your companions have left you, and you couldn't handle the woods. I'm not wrong, am I? You had your taste of the local life, eh? Did you enjoy it? Do you want more? He takes a full syringe out of his pocket. I'll show you more. We get transported back to the doctor's perspective, starting in the train car with the stranger lying on the ground. Moving forward, the train wreck keeps extending with more train cars that themselves start taking on odd shapes, eventually morphing into rooms. Walking into the first one, there's a bed in the middle, with a woman sitting on it reading a book. Moving out of the room, it changes, and now the woman is curled up on the bed, with Janek, the chicken lady, and the stranger standing next to her. In the next room, we see the stranger looking through the window at the same woman on the bed, now looking more disfigured as the chicken lady calls for a doctor. We keep walking, finding the passage forward blocked by Janek, who tells us to help the pretty lady, so we try, but only manage to tie up her hands and feet so that she can't hurt anybody. Unable to do anything else, we leave, only to get yelled at by Janek, calling us a charlatan for not being able to help his sister. We approach the train wreck from the outside now, and as we walk forward, the people lying on the ground start talking, begging us for help at first, but as we ignore them, they start cursing the doctor for failing them. Finally, in the last train car, we see ourselves again and hear the doctor's voice. I feel as if my head is about to explode under the pressure of the train car's walls. Hello? Can you hear me? I know you can hear me, motherfucker. I barely recognize the doctor's blurry image in the dark. You wish this would end, right? You'd like to get out of here. Maybe now you'll understand how it feels to be locked away, surrounded by deformed, rotting bodies among the cries of those pathetic villagers. How was I supposed to help them? How? First they begged for help, now I have to fucking hide from them. The doctor falls silent. It feels like whole hours are passing by. Can you hear it? It's the walls. They're talking to me. My girl is talking to me. She's calling me. I know she's waiting for me. I must go back to her. She's so close. His voice breaks down. I want to go back home. The pain becomes unbearable. Show me where to find the exit from this accursed place. His silhouette slowly blurs away. Show me where. Where is it? Where? Whatever he injected us with allowed us to see his perspective, a hallucination showing us what it was like for him. The force brought along a plague, causing some people to get sick and mutate or go crazy, so the villagers asked the doctor for help, expecting him to do something. Obviously, he had no idea what he was dealing with, but the villagers didn't care, so eventually he fled, right as a bunch of them stormed his house where you just so happened to be that night. The doctor again asks you for the location of the underground entrance, but the injection must have been stronger this time, as before you can say anything, you slip out of reality, entering another dream. It's pretty clear that this dream is a visual representation of the doctor trying to get you to tell him the location of the bunker door, and you struggling against giving it away. Dying in the dream, the doctor gets what he wants, and you end up telling him the location against your will, leading to him leaving you in the train car and disappearing. In this case, the stranger is obviously mad, as reading the journal entry, he assumes he got drugged, writing, "Fuck this, I must reach it before him if I am to have any chance of escaping this accursed place." Surviving, on the other hand, and reaching the end, you manage to overpower the drugs, and, to the surprise of the doctor, wake up. With the doctor defenseless, he backs away further into the train car, stumbling and falling over as you approach him. Talking to him, he's pathetic, cowering on the ground but not letting go of the key he stole. He ends the conversation with giving you a choice. Either tell him the location of the exit, or kill him. Killing him, you get the key, so that's good, but the doctor isn't much of a threat to you as clearly visible now, and sparing him, he can end up being useful later on. So in the end, it's best to just show him your map. Doing this, he's obviously surprised, but thanks you, saying that he'll wait for you at the bunker door, and warning you that the door is a one-way, so you should make sure to bring all the essentials and valuables when you're ready to go. With that, the conversation ends, and before you know it, the doctor is gone. Now, this is the way events unfold if you sided with the musician, where he set you up with an appointment, and this is how the events unfold if you sided with the Wolfman. Yeah, you literally skip the entire sequence where the doctor drugs you, since he didn't know you were coming and wasn't prepared when you arrived. The dialogue is all the same, with him falling over and then giving you the choice to kill him or tell him the location, so there isn't anything new or special about this. The only difference is that you skip out on the chase sequence, which guarantees that you benefit from the doctor later on by sparing him. Again, another benefit of siding with the Wolfman. Now that you either let the doctor go or got the key yourself, you're able to go through the bunker door in the underground entrance. Before that, though, I recommend you finish exploring this main map, as there are bound to be a few locations and items you most likely missed, and you can't return here after you leave, so you want to make sure you're well prepared before setting out. First off, there's still the wedding, which I only briefly mentioned in the very beginning when I went through the notable dry meadow locations. The reason I didn't talk about the wedding back then was because exploring there 9 out of 10 times you'll find absolutely nothing of note, only running into a chained dog and a metal door requiring a code. Getting this code is completely luck dependent, as it requires you to encounter a specific night event where you'll hear knocking on the front door, investigating which you'll find an invitation for the wedding. I've played this game for a while and only encountered this invitation one time, so that makes me believe it's quite rare. Now, I already mentioned this, but I'll mention it again. Darkwood does an incredible job of making you afraid of the unknown. I notice this every time I play the game when I explore a new location or encounter a new night event, and the wedding was no exception. Right off the bat, the music that plays here is ominous to say the least, and the whole theming of the location doesn't help matters. Unlocking the metal door, the main house is dark, but not dark enough to require a light source, which was both good and bad, seeing as I came ill-prepared. Exploring indoors, you'll end up going outside, around the back, where you catch a glimpse of a figure disappearing behind the corner of the building. The banging that was heard from a ways off now grows louder, and climbing through another window into the large dining hall, you realize where it's coming from as you find the groom, sitting at the front, slamming his head against the table, repeating a phrase over and over. The music shifts to include a rhythmic beat in line with the sound of the groom banging his head against the wood. At this point I was getting really anxious, anticipating the worst but pushing forward, walking past the groom and outside into a dense patch of trees where a bunch of women dressed in white were dancing, inviting me to dance with them. I couldn't hear the groom anymore, but the rhythm persisted, growing louder and louder as I returned into the dining hall, now completely empty. Just like that, it's over. There's no last moment scares or anything, just the feeling of relief as the music calms down and slowly fades, leaving you to process what just happened. The last major location that you'll most likely come across as you play is the Hunter's House in the Old Woods. What sets this place apart from the other major locations is that at first glance it doesn't seem to hold any significance or tie-ins to a larger part of the world or story or anything like that. It's very standalone in both senses, consisting of a single, heavily barricaded house that is home to a huge dog and two red chompers. On the surface it seems like just another regular location with some decent loot and a few enemies to guard it, but trust me, there's a lot more to it, and by the end it will tie in and help explain everything. Spending one last night in the forest before departing for good, morning comes and the traitor appears again, more frantic than ever before. Somehow he knows about you finding the key, and in a final attempt desperately tries to persuade you against using it to go through the bunker. Again, he seems to actually care about us, but remains vague, not giving any specifics as to why we should stay. The thing is, even if he did, the bunker would remain as the only way to progress, so no matter what, we grab all our important loot and set out towards the underground entrance. Back in the tunnel, if you spared the doctor, you'll find him standing next to the bunker door, waiting for your signal to use the key. If the doctor managed to escape, then you'll find the door already ajar, with no sign of him up ahead, implying that he came through here sometime before you. In any case, going through the door, you find yourself deeper underground, in what appears to be a maintenance tunnel that starts rumbling as you walk through it. Reaching the end, you notice a man, lying on a bunch of rubble covered in roots and a layer of some sort of white substance, with a strange growth-covered cross next to him. The tunnel has collapsed recently. The reinforced steel protruding from the debris has not been covered with rust yet. When I gaze into the tunnel, I notice the silhouette of a man on the ground. Suddenly, the man snaps to life as if woken up from a deep slumber. "Who goes there?" I hear a faint, unnaturally distorted male voice. Are you one of them?" The man attempts to get up, but fails. I can see him desperately flailing his limbs around. It's as if his back has been glued to the ground. "No, please." As I approach him, he shuffles his legs nervously, as if trying to retreat into a collapsed tunnel. "I didn't do anything. I beg you. I just wanted to pass, to get back to my family." The tree has blocked the only way out, the only path home, a huge talking tree. I begged it to let me pass, but it wouldn't listen. I could not understand what it was saying to me, so we came here. The man props himself up on his elbows. With a huge effort, he tries to straighten his body, but something is firmly holding him by the back and the neck. I can't get up. The man drops onto the rubble and goes silent. He clenches his fists. My head hurts. The man places his hand on his forehead and feels a strange dent above his left brow. He freezes. What is this?" He carefully inserts his index finger into the hole. His eyelid twitches. "My stone." I hear a sound as if an eggshell cracking. The forehead bends under his hand. The stranger pushes another finger into the hole. A thick goo spews from the wound. I can hear his skull cracking. My little stone. The man slowly removes his fingers from the hole in his head, a colorless ooze dripping from them. He's holding something, a round object. That's why. He swings his left hand and throws the object at me. A small irregular ball bounces off my arm and lands at my feet. This is what put me to sleep. His head lifelessly drops to the concrete floor of the destroyed tunnel and goes still. The man mentions that he tried leaving the forest, but was stopped by a large talking tree, so he came down here to the underground tunnel and now looks to be trapped. There's obviously something wrong with the guy, the way he talks, and the fact that he literally caved in a part of his skull to pick out a bullet that was lodged in his head. After tossing the bullet at you, he goes limp, and at this moment, if the doctor was with you, you'll hear the bang of a door up ahead. The doctor fled anyways. You follow the tunnel deeper, reaching a point where it starts flooding, forcing you to wade through the muddy water as you press on. As you keep walking, you start hearing voices coming from the walls, or more specifically, what looks to be people, who, just like the guy from before, are trapped by huge roots, unable to move. Eventually, you cross the flooded section of the tunnel and approach a huge eyeball protruding out of the ground. It's harmless, and incapable of doing anything but hiding when you look at it, which also causes the tendril growing beside it to retract into its hole, allowing you to pass. Just up ahead, you stumble across another body lying on the ground, and inspecting it you find another cross, very similar to the one from a bit ago, but without the growths. Examining the corpse, the stranger notes a small hole in the forehead, and presumes the body to be over 2 years old, seeing how all that's left is skin and bone covered in roots. It's a one-to-one description of the strange man lying in the rubble from before, down to the bullet hole in the cross, but the copy that was alive was different, having white growths all over. It doesn't make much sense at the moment, and with no further option to investigate, all that's left to do is move on, reaching a staircase that takes you back above ground. To no surprise, the tunnel doesn't actually lead you out of the forest, instead seemingly doing the opposite, bringing you closer to the center. Emerging from the bunker tunnel, you exit out into the swamp, Chapter 2's main and only biome. The swamp stands out among the other biomes as being hands down the hardest one, with very rough and unfriendly terrain, and enemies that are arguably worse than chompers, while also being more common. The atmosphere here is also unique, with the whole swamp being mostly covered in a sickly pale yellow tint, and the background noise consisting of various bugs like crickets and cicadas with the occasional frog croak. It's a great final biome, being completely new and dangerous, requiring you to use previous game knowledge to figure things out again, so that you can eventually find a way to finally make it out of this accursed place. Just like the first chapter, this one begins in a hideout, although this time around this one is much bigger, actually being the largest hideout in the game, consisting of 2 separate houses that are both hooked up to the oven. Familiarizing yourself with the layout, you find a broken compressor, another eyeball, and 2 containers, one in the form of a black goo-covered crate in the oven house, and the second a corpse lying on the ground outside next to the generator. The black substance on the crate makes it inaccessible, so you'll probably try to find a way of removing it, or maybe you'll get rid of it unknowingly, like I did on multiple occasions when I had a lantern equipped. This black substance, which normally appears on enemies, gets affected by exposure to light, in which case it will slowly burn away until it's gone altogether. It's not encountered very commonly, but that's because enemies that are affected by it are invincible until the substance gets removed, making dealing with them a lot harder, as they can't be insta-killed with something like a shotgun or a Molotov. Getting rid of the substance on the crate, you can open it to find some random loot like flares or gasoline. Looting the corpse on the ground outside, there's at least one interesting item, that being another lore note. It's a bit more confusing than any of the previous notes, consisting of a map and a text report that uses military time describing the observations recorded by a group of military personnel who were using the hideout sometime prior. Seeing as this report was written over 2 years ago, it's safe to assume that all the members of the group are either gone or, more likely, dead. It seems like the people here were tasked with observing the forest as it grows, keeping tabs on the tree, and gathering photos of it for an unknown reason. Either way, the note proves to be useful besides being another lore bit, as the map contains the position for both locations mentioned in the report, allowing the stranger to mark them on his map. Out of the 2 locations that got discovered from that note, the closer one will always be the swamp village, so it will most likely end up being the first location you visit. As the name implies, it is in fact a village, but unlike the previous one, it isn't a separate event location, so time will keep moving as you explore. This is important here since the location is a bit maze-like, with a lot of different houses with various blocked off passageways that make fully exploring and looting the village a bit of a hassle, usually requiring more than 1 day unless you know what you're doing ahead of time. One of the 3 new enemies found in the swamp, human spiders have the interesting quality of behaving differently depending on if you're looking at them, moving a lot quicker and being generally more aggressive when not in your line of sight. Besides that, they have a basic melee attack and 2 ranged attacks, one where they rip off one of their arms to chuck at you, and one where they tear out one of their torsos, which transforms into another human spider a short while after landing on the ground. This is something that might seem extremely dangerous at first, but in reality the spiders don't have all that much HP, and the torsos can be focused down before they regrow, so unless you're dealing with some other high priority enemies, getting swarmed isn't a big issue. Continuing through the village, there's a high likelihood of you encountering another one of the swamp's inhabitants if you stray too far into the water near this partially submerged tractor. These lizard crocodile humans are called swampers, and are the main reason why wading far into deep water is always considered a bad idea. These guys are quite dangerous, since they can submerge underwater and then resurface in a completely different part of the pond, potentially appearing behind you. On top of that, they can leap out of the water and spit snaring vines which don't do any damage but snare you similarly to chain traps, making it harder to dodge attacks. With all this in mind, it's best to avoid them, as they can be easily spotted from a distance due to the distinctive ripples they create when submerged. With the swamper either dead or avoided, you keep exploring. Seeing a flock of crows flying overhead, the stranger mentions how they must have gotten scared off by something from the huge tree further in the village. Going to find out what that was, you'll enter a flooded barn, where you'll meet the cripple. An old man with very poor eyesight, he lost both his legs, so he's left to sit in this corner of the barn, spending his days alone, surviving on raw fish. Surprised to find another human here, seeing as the rest of the village died out, he grabs your arm to get your attention and starts talking, seeming frantic knowing that this is his first conversation with someone else in a long time. He mentions the tree in the village, complaining about it, and then begs you to find a way to get rid of it, suggesting you go to find the village basement where you'll be able to get at its roots. Gossiping with him, he tells you more about the village back when people still lived here, and before that tree grew out of nowhere, blocking them off from the road leading out of the woods. Ending the conversation, you can move deeper through the barn, wading through the water as the wailing gets louder and large tree branches appear overhead. Walking up to the base of the talking tree, you can examine it, and the sight you're presented with is not at all comforting. The background noise in the village is coming from the multitudes of faces growing out of the tree, and now we understand the cripple who mentioned how the wailing was making him go crazy. It's another one of the forest's messed up and mutated creations, just like the various deformed monstrosities, but here we don't have a direct way of killing the thing, needing to find its roots down in the village basement. You're given 3 options when confronting the talking tree. Kick it, try to climb it, or look at the man in the bark who is attempting to talk to you. Kicking the tree, you break off a small branch, which turns out to be someone's arm sticking out of the bark. The broken arm starts seeping a white substance, which flows back into the tree, creating a new branch almost instantly. Attempting to climb the tree is out of the question, as the people growing out of the bark start grabbing you as you try to scale the soft and slippery trunk, forcing you to back off. Listening to the man, most of what he says gets drowned out by the other people, so you're only able to make out one word: radio. If we were to believe the cripple, then past this tree there is a road leading out of the swamp. As such, our main goal now becomes getting rid of the talking tree, and following the cripple's advice, the routes in the village basement seem to be our best current bet. Entering the basement through a nearby floor hatch, you find yourself in a small cramped tunnel, and following it for a while you reach a flooded opening which prevents you from going further. Reaching the roots requires you to now go and find an oxygen tank that you would be able to use to swim underwater to reach the deeper parts of the basement where the roots are located. Going back above ground, you can return to the cripple and talk to him again. He assumes the place to be flooded, so he directs you to the elephants living in the swamp. He says that they keep to themselves but have oxygen tanks, so he gives you the general location of their swamp cottage, recommending that you go over there and try to get a tank yourself. Now, exploring the rest of the village, there's a chance that you'll run into the doctor again, depending on how your first encounter with him went down. If you're overwhelmed by the drugs, then the doctor made it to the swamp a fair bit before you, as obvious by the small camp near the hideout where you can find a partially burned medical book. On the other hand, if you help the doctor voluntarily, then he only runs away from you when you both make it to the bunker, so exploring the swamp, you know he couldn't have gone far. In this case, the doctor can be found all over the swamp at a few major locations, including the village. You can find him 3 separate times this way, and each time he appears more and more far gone, slowly going mad, turning into a savage. Talking to him during the first encounter, he reminisces of a time before the forest started mutating and spreading an incurable disease, when he was just a normal doctor doing his job. He still obviously despises you, mentioning you as part of a group, comparing the forest to a body, with all of its inhabitants being the antibodies trying to keep your kind out. It makes sense why the villagers and the doctor hate outsiders like you, though. The doctor saw them coming wearing their hazard suits, hiding in their hideouts, and then leaving, but not allowing the natives out, letting them continue to rot away in the forest. Besides the various dialogues the doctor can be traded with, but he doesn't accept anything, instead giving you 100 reputation each time you find him, allowing you to take one of the 3 items he has. It's a good way of obtaining some more expensive items like gun parts, but the doctor also sells some embryos, probably having found them while exploring, not knowing what to do with them himself. If you're wondering what happens to the doctor when he runs off before you come to your senses, he won't appear around the swamp in the same way, instead leaving behind a campsite somewhere in the swamp where he presumably spent the nights. Digging through it, there's a few collectibles of note, including a camera caked in mud, a burnt paper with some drawing on it, and a note titled "Torn Page from Journal 1. This turns out to be one of the pages that the doctor ripped out from your journal in the prologue, and reading it we learn more about the stranger's past, confirming that he was sent into the forest alongside other people, groups of military personnel that use the tunnels to traverse the forest. Looking back at the burnt page, we can make out the drawing of a combine harvester, and exploring the swamp, you'll find one, with a hidden path leading to a hidden location, where you'll find the doctor, curled up next to a campfire, talking to himself. Trying to approach him, he notices you, backing away before grabbing a branch and lighting it on fire to fend you off. Even as he bleeds out on the ground, he swings the stick at you, leaving you no choice but to finish him for good. Searching his corpse, you find multiple notes written by the doctor after he made it to the swamp, detailing his exploration. "The fucker showed me the exit. Finally." I was there, in the cottage. This is where the voice was coming from. I wasn't mistaken. How could I have missed it? Those village idiots would happily feed me to the woods, but I still couldn't close those fucking doors in the tunnels. They've suffered enough. Unfortunately, this means I'll also have to look out for the rat. He will come after me, that bastard. I'm sure of it. I should have killed him when he was lying in the cart, helpless. As it turns out, he was the one to leave the markings in the underground entrance cottage, hoping that the villagers could use them to also make it through the tunnel, although, as we now know, it wouldn't have led them out of the forest. I was hoping that this damn stinking hole would lead me to the exit. Unfortunately, the roots have broken through the tunnel walls and blocked the passage. However, I feel I'm getting closer. I can hear her more clearly. I searched the cottage. I've found some weird devices connected to the oven. The locals don't use such equipment. Rats must have made a hideout out of it. I'm sure of it. Apart from the oven, I've also found a broken compressor. Looks like they are using oxygen tanks when traversing the woods. I need to leave this house as soon as possible. Whispers. Whispers in the radio. Whispers in my head. Louder than usual. I feel I'm close now. I've seen him. He's back to his place. I took a photo of the motherfucker. I remember this place vaguely. I haven't been here in ages. Everything is flooded and overgrown, but I remember the shrine and the cottages. I used to come here to treat people. The tree in the village must have grown no later than 5 years ago when the forest blocked me from this place. As the notes go on, you can see how the doctor's mental state declined. Mentioning the voice over and over, his writing makes less and less sense, until... Returning to the hideout as the sun sets, you get ready for the night, not knowing exactly what might happen, but preparing for the worst. With you now being in the swamp, it's fitting that the nights are even harder than before, with banshees and chompers being extremely common, and some enemies spawning covered in the black substance. The first night in the swamp is different though. Going outside, you find the traitor, lying on the ground, dead. It's a shocking moment seeing the only actually friendly character killed off so unexpectedly. It hurts even more seeing him here, next to the hideout, as he was most definitely trying to find you, only to be killed when he was this close. His head has been severed, still in the helmet, which has the word liar scratched onto the visor. The traitor was carrying 2 items, a key and a strange journal, both of which look nearly identical to your bunker key and journal, except for the fact that the traitor's versions are covered in white growths. Thinking back to the bunker, we saw a man who ended up being a copy of a corpse found later on in the tunnels, and just like the traitor, the copy had a strange version of the original corpse's cross. This leads us to believing that the traitor is in some way a copy of the stranger, but the question of how and why remains a mystery. Looking back through the hideout, you meet the 3, a strange trio wearing weird masks who show up in the hideout looking to barter. Seeing as they appear at the same time as the traitor, a common theory regarding them is that they were the ones to kill him, taking his bag and now selling the resources themselves. This is something that I thought the first time I played the game, but there isn't any hard evidence to this, and the word liar leads me to believe that the culprit was actually the stranger. I mean, think about it yourself. On multiple occasions, the traitor tried stopping you, saying that you shouldn't go forward as the bunker tunnel would only lead you deeper into the woods. At this point, the stranger has been through a lot, and the effects of the drugs and the forest itself have altered him. He isn't fazed about killing others, only caring about escaping the forest, so in his head, the traitor was becoming just another obstacle, a liar that was trying to keep him in the woods forever. With the start of a new day, it's time to explore the swamp, trying to make sense of everything while also searching for the swamp cottage where the elephant family resides. Before that, though, there's still the marked junkyard cottage, which is also worth visiting. Going over there, you find the junkyard itself, a large field of junk and scrap piles, partially flooded in some places, and occupied by human spiders and red flares. Or, at least, that's what you would encounter if you didn't do Piotric's questline. Helping Piotric build his rocket, it actually does take off, but crash lands here in the junkyard, scaring off all the enemies, but killing Piotric in the process. The game again harshly reminds you just how much impact your decisions have, by showing you the aftermath of your actions as someone else ends up suffering, leaving you to deal with the guilt. Exploring the junkyard, you'll find a bunch of scrap piles that can be dug for various resources. Approaching the edge of the map where the cottage is marked, you find a path leading you further, and as you walk along it, you start hearing voices coming from the sides, from inside the large snail shells lying on the ground. Eventually, you reach the cottage, with a huge snail on the roof that hides in its shell as you approach. Examining the shell, it has some cracks on the back side, and breaking it open, you can enter to talk to the snail. This isn't your normal snail, as besides its absolutely gigantic size, its head appears to be a human skull, partially covered in slimy skin. At first, the snail asks you why you disturbed it, but then quickly switches to the topic of how ugly you are, recommending you to keep your face covered. Hearing a woman's voice, the snail then asks if you hear it as well, before begging you to cut it loose so that it can follow the voice to find whoever it is. Now, when I first played the game, I thought cutting it loose required me to cut its stomach so that it could leave the shell, but as it turns out, that just kills the snail, opening a passage into the cottage. Instead, what the snail means is for you to go back outside and follow some hard-to-notice wires to a clearing, where they connect to a weird bulbous growth that you need to break. To do this, you need to grab the key from the snail's hand and use it to open the door in the nearby ruined house, allowing you to stare down the eye, letting you enter the clearing. After that's done, returning to the snail, it tells you it feels free, and that when you return here tomorrow, it'll be long gone, but as a result, you'll be able to enter the cottage through the hole in its shell under its stomach. With this, you have to wait until tomorrow to explore the cottage, but that's okay, because if you looked into the wardrobe in the ruined house nearby, you'll have found something to keep your attention. As you can probably tell, this is a map of the junkyard that includes all the scrap piles, which are handily labeled, telling you what you should expect to find when digging them. It seems like this note was written by the same guys who were camping out at the swamp hideout, seeing as the note there said some of the members went off to the junkyard to find spare parts for the broken compressor. Looking at the map, surely enough, one of the piles, labeled F, seems to contain some scrap, cloth, and the coveted parts, so now you know where to look to repair the compressor back at base. With that in mind, there's still the whole rest of the swamp to explore and loot, and a couple major and minor locations to talk about. The various smaller set pieces usually consist of old buildings that have some sort of simple puzzle to solve before getting a reward. Take for instance this small shed full of worms with some explosive canisters near the door, which when detonated clear enough of the ground allowing you to reach the crate at the back. Or this other ruin where the door is locked, but you can use a nearby gas canister to blow it open with relative ease. Of course, you still have your normal ruins as well, but these are a lot more dangerous, with one of them containing 5 chompers, requiring you to either spam Molotovs or pick them off from a range with a pistol, or more preferably a shotgun. Okay, how many chompers was that? There was like 4 or 5 chompers, oh my god. Hopefully they had something good. Okay, military file's pretty good. Holy gasoline, Jesus Christ. Walking around, you've probably noticed the small holes in the ground, and if you have, then you've probably gone to investigate. The game continues its trend of horrific, disfigured creatures with the centipede, which appears as some sort of worm that burrowed into a human body, taking the space of the head and one of the arms. These things are really spastic and dangerous, having melee and charge attacks and the ability to burrow underground, similarly to swampers, only to much more success, allowing them to constantly appear near you, closing large gaps almost instantly. The charge attack is also absurd, with a small wind-up before the centipede burrows forward, looking like a teleport, damaging you as it moves through you. To give you an idea of how bad they are, the devs actually nerfed them on the console version, probably because you wouldn't be able to keep up with them using a controller with how much they move and burrow around you. Before continuing on with the progression, there is one major location that appears to be independent from the rest, and isn't required for making it out of the swamp. What I'm talking about is the Great Lake, a large portion of the swamp that's shrouded by an ever-present storm, darkening the area dramatically and making it harder to move around. Attempting to explore the Great Lake, you'll find it to be crawling with coated chompers, who wake up to the slightest light disturbance from your flashlight or lantern. As such, you're better off using flares, throwing them ahead of yourself, making sure they land on solid ground, so that you can make it past the chompers to reach the eye of the storm. The best explanation I can come up with is that this snout-like formation extends deep down into the earth, sort of like an air geyser blowing air out, forming the storm. This is because hitting it with a melee attack causes the snout to shrivel up, and the storm slowly dissipates, waking up some of the chompers nearby. With the storm gone, you're free to explore the rest of the lake, although the only items of interest are found in the small shed near the snout. Here you can find some really high quality loot and ammunition, alongside a pair of gumboots that protect you from poisonous floor hazards like worms or white mushrooms. If you spoke to the snail before this, then you'll know that it wants a pair of gumboots, so you can give them to it, but you'll get no reward for doing this, so it's pointless. Following the cripple's directions, you find the swamp cottage, a secluded home in the middle of a flooded thicket, inhabited by chompers and swampers, with a red flare glowing in between the trees. Passing around the barricades of the cottage, you can find the one entrance, a trapped path winding around the house. Reaching the main door, you can enter, but attempting to open the door leading into the large room, it's locked, and you can hear someone inside. The voice tells you to prove that you can be trusted by repairing the generator outside, which, if you've been disarming the bear traps along the path, is not a problem. Returning inside, you meet the elephants, a mom and two kids wearing protective clothing and gas masks connected to oxygen tanks on their backs. The two kids look afraid of you, I wonder why, hiding behind their mother, who notes that you're a stranger, not seeing you here before and commenting on your face and inability to speak, attributing it to the fact that you've been breathing in the forest air. The woman asks what you want, but obviously seeing as you can't really say, she starts talking about her third son who ran away from home. She asks you to find him and bring him back, giving you the key to his room so that you can inspect it to try to find a clue as to where he went. Looking in the room, you instantly spot some childish drawings on the ground, and looking further, you can pull back the bed mat and find a crude map, which the stranger uses to mark a general area on his own map. With that new information, you head over there, being mindful of the enemies outside the cottage and in general. The major location in this circle is the Mushroom Glade, which, being as big as it is, can easily be found and marked by accident when you're just out and about exploring the swamp. Entering it, the place is almost completely covered in mushrooms and a white fog, making everything feel slow and hazy. In the center of the grove, you find a house, looking very mushroomy, and inside that house, you can find the Mushroom Granny. Avoiding all the white mushrooms on the floor, you can talk to her, but she's asleep, leaving you with the option to either wake her up or eat a mushroom growing from her head. Now, I'll get this out of the way right now. There's an achievement to obtain for continuing to pick the mushrooms, eventually resulting in you eating her. This is basically the extreme version of skipping all the dialogue with the character, as now you obtain her key, which otherwise requires you to talk to her and potentially complete a quest for her. If we ignore the ability to literally eat a mushroom person, then you guessed it. Depending on your previous actions, the dialogue can unfold in a few different ways. This time, the determining factor is what you did at the pig shed, because if the sow died, the villagers managed to break through their part of the forest, like the wolfman predicted, and are now in the swamp, at a location called the quarry. Talking to her at first, she asks what you want, but no matter what you do, she'll dismiss you, seeing as you can't say anything. If you grab the child's drawings from the elephant child's room, then you can show them to her here, which causes her to tell you about the kid, how he came to her house, and how she let him stay. Now, if you haven't killed the sow, then your life is a lot easier, as Granny straight up gives you the key to the door next to her, where you'll find the child and be able to bring him home. If, on the other hand, the villagers made it to the quarry, Granny will ask that you get rid of them first, fearing that they will find her house and eat it alongside her. The quarry is located on the edge of the swamp, and is usually near the mushroom glade, so finding it shouldn't prove too much of an issue. Approaching it, there's a truck full of rock in front of the passage leading into the quarry itself, where the villagers have set up a camp. There's a few healthy villagers here sitting around guarding the place, but the rest are sick, slowly withering away in the rock-strewn valley. To complete Granny's quest, you can do two things. Either just kill the healthy villagers, or get an achievement by breaking the supports of a conveniently located boulder, trapping the villagers in the quarry with no way out. I mean, at some point you kinda start feeling for the villagers, seeing just how much you can mess with them, for no reason except that some random weirdos you met wanted you to. With the villagers taken care of, you return to Granny, who gives you the key and tells you to return to her tomorrow when she finishes making you a sweater, which is just a slightly better light armor. With the key in both situations obtained, you can enter the room and confront the child, who, understandably, isn't all that trusting of a murderous psychopath that looks like this. Man, the stranger just can't catch a break, can he? The only way to get the child back to the elephants is to pick him up and carry him all the way to the cottage, while he screams a poem over and over. As it turns out, the journey isn't all that long, as you instantly fast travel to the cottage with seemingly no time having passed. With the third son back home, the mother berates the poor kid and leads him away into his room, before coming back with an empty oxygen tank as a thanks for going through the effort. Now, this is one of the 3 ways that you can obtain an oxygen tank. The second way is very simple. There's also a third way, which is the least obvious and also the most convoluted, as it requires you to first find the child in the granny's house and then listen to his poem. This poem has 4 distinct numbers, 1, 2, 4, and 5, which are used as a code for a metal door inside the old shed, which is located to the left of the swamp cottage. Inside, you'll find a corpse of what appears to be a child holding onto the empty oxygen tank. On the table opposite him, there's a moldy old journal that is barely legible, with the stranger only being able to discern 1 line of text. If you talk to the elephant mother a bit more when you first met her, she mentions her 4th child, who I assume is the corpse in the shed, who brought that journal that we see on the table. It's strange how the mother doesn't acknowledge that one of her children is literally lying dead in the shed out back, but I think the reason for this is that she, like the rest of the forest dwellers, is a bit crazy, meaning that she too has been breathing in the forest air. I mean, I don't think I saw a compressor anywhere around her, and if she says that it's her dead child that fills up their tanks, then I'm inclined to think that they are breathing the same air as everyone else. Anyways, with the tank now acquired, you'll probably head back to the hideout to fill it up at the compressor, but upon arrival, there's a chance that you'll notice that somebody has been through here. There's actually 2 variations of this event that can occur depending on who you sided with for the Pretty Lady quest, and also if you killed the sow or not. Siding with the musician, you'll find a bunch of footprints all over the hideout, and inspecting your workbench, you'll find some of the items missing, being replaced by a note from the Wolfman. Basically, he found out that you gave the key to the musician and got very mad, so he stole some of your items and wrote this letter telling you that if you want them back, you'll have to find him at the old sawmill somewhere in the swamp. Reaching the sawmill and going inside, you pass through a small connector room before entering the large workroom, where the Wolfman starts speaking to you through the speakers. He's pissed that you disrespected him like this, and tells you that before he gives you back your items, he wants you to entertain him. He tells you to drop off all your items outside, before grabbing the supplies he left you in a package, a table leg, a knife, and 2 pills. After you do that, the doors leading out of the room shut, and the Wolfman summons 2 huge dogs to fight you, before appearing himself, ready to finish you off. Now, the first time I went over to the sawmill after the Wolfman showed up, I had no idea what was going to happen, and I was still very bad with the melee combat, so I ended up dying not even 10 seconds after the huge dogs appeared. Going back to the sawmill, I was hoping that I could still get my items some way, but all I found was another note from the Wolfman and a present that he left for me. This is supposed to be a very difficult encounter, that again punishes you for not siding with the Wolfman, but there is a way of completely trivializing the fight. See, the Wolfman won't start the fight if you have any of your regular items on you, but he doesn't notice any items that you drop inside the arena, allowing you to start the fight and then pick up your regular weapons and healing items. It's a scummy approach, but at the same time I find it fitting, seeing as the Wolfman himself is a cunning bastard, so it's pretty ironic that in the end, the easiest way to get rid of him is to trick him out. Furthermore, you can save the effort of fighting the Wolfman entirely by just killing him in Chapter 1 if you do the Musician's Quest line, which I recommend, as this event is only really annoying. The other variant of this event requires you to side with the Wolfman and kill the Sow before entering the swamp. Going down this path, after a few days you'll notice a trail of grime leading into the hideout and into a room locked with the metal door. Later on, at some point during the night, this metal door will unlock, allowing you to go inside, where you'll find the musician. By the looks of it, his mutation has gotten a lot worse, with his whole body looking disproportionate. His skin looks rough and veiny, sagging in places, and his clothes are all dirty and ripped up. Talking to him, he apologizes again, not knowing that this was your house, only finding this place after he was kicked out of the camp by the villagers. As it turns out, when the villagers broke through to the swamp, the musician came along, but soon got chased off and eventually found his way here. He begs you to let him stay, and seeing as he isn't really doing any harm, you leave him be. After this moment, the musician has a few simple interactions, each of which can be encountered every new day. Returning to him after the first night, you'll notice that the whole room is covered in a toxic substance, let out by the musician's mutation, which prevents you from camping in this room overnight. On the next day, you'll find that the musician caught a rat, and taking it, you can cook it for a hefty amount of essence. The day after, the musician can be found playing with a ping pong ball, which you have the option to either leave for him or take yourself. After that, the musician will ask you for some food, feeling hungry, and you're given the option to give him a few different things. The musician will accept bread, meat, or hallucinogens, and while feeding him bread or meat is fine, giving him a hallucinogen will affect him adversely. At first everything seems normal, and the musician thanks you for feeding him by ripping a part of his shirt and giving it to you in the form of a string and a rag. Checking up on him the next day though, things aren't looking too good. Feeding the musician a hallucinogen seems to have accelerated or altered his mutation, causing him to grow in size, now taking up the entire room. At this point, you can't talk to him anymore or do anything to help, so you leave him again, returning the next morning to find him completely gone, never to be seen or heard from again. With the oxygen tanks refilled, now you're able to go back to the village basement, but before that there's still two other underwater tunnels that were mentioned by the doctor during your first encounter with him in the swamp. Both are located somewhere around the edge, and when talking to the doctor he mentions their general direction, so you'll be able to find them with relative ease. The first of these two locations, when found, gets marked on the map with a drawing of 3 cross graves outside the swamp border. Diving down, you appear in a darker part of the swamp, in a small pond with the 3 cross graves behind you in the water. The atmosphere here quickly becomes off-putting as you start walking around, noting the skeleton stuck in the mud before approaching the burned remains of a house with trees growing inside it. With one of the doors locked, you enter the separate room at the bottom, where you find another skeleton and a wardrobe with a picture of some people walking down the street through a village. Leaving the room, you run into a talking human spider. Two more human spiders barge in, and after killing them, you notice that previously locked door is now open. Looking inside, there's a toppled wardrobe with another picture, a helicopter just in frame, flying over what appears to be a burning village house. The other underwater tunnel leads to a wreckage, where you find the remains of a crashed helicopter that fell in a small clearing outside the swamp. While it might not be the same helicopter from the picture, it appears like it too was flying over the forest when something caused it to crash here, with nobody surviving the landing. This helicopter is a copy of the real-world Polish Mi-8 military-grade helicopter, which makes sense, seeing as you find a person lying nearby, equipped with a rifle and military flashlight. Going inside the crashed helicopter, you find 2 more bodies, and a torn piece of a photo showing the doctor. If you remember back to the old woods when you confronted or got confronted by the doctor in the train wreck, you could have found another ripped photo in the doctor's bed. That and this piece fit together to create the full photo of the doctor, his wife, and their kid, taken before the events of the game when the doctor was living with his family outside the forest. The most likely thing that happened was after the doctor went off to treat the villagers, his wife got worried, so she asked the people going into the forest to find him, using the helicopter and reference photo to search for him. What's even more likely, though, is that the 2 corpses in the helicopter are of the wife and kid, who, along with the pilot, went out searching for the doctor, only to have the helicopter crash. Anyways, with that unsettling realization out of the way, it's about time to go and use the oxygen tank for its main purpose. Diving down, you enter a new dream, finding yourself in a storage room containing stacks of chests, presumably filled with food, and a large metal barrel containing some gasoline. You're given one path forward through the only door, which loops the room, changing it slightly each time, as the water on the floor slowly drains, and the surroundings start looking more and more run down. Eventually, you find an axe and a torch lying on the ground, and the storage room stops looping, with the door now leading to a barricaded staircase that someone or something is trying to get through. Just like the other dreams, this one has a few endings that, in this case, all have the same effect of just waking you up. Going through the tunnel that appeared at the top of the screen, it keeps extending on, and eventually you'll turn back only to realize that you've been trapped. The dream then ends as the tunnel gets filled with a black goo, covering the character, making the screen go pitch black. Alternatively, you can try to break the barricades on the staircase with the axe, causing a black chomper to spawn that you can then kill or be killed by to end the dream. In any case, you emerge from the underwater tunnel, and following the path, enter the same storage room from the dream, only now it's a lot more decrepit. Going up the same tunnel, you can see the tree roots alongside what appears to be the talking tree's heart, pulsating at a steady rhythm. Unfortunately, you can't squeeze through the tunnel to reach the heart directly, so you do the next best thing, going back to the large metal barrel, breaking off the valve, letting the gasoline pour across the ground towards the roots. As you light the gasoline and the roots catch flame, you can hear the screams of the people stuck in the tree, getting louder and louder as the fire spreads, turning into a cacophony of anguished wails as you emerge from the cellar. The fire is huge, coloring the sky orange, but even still the tree resists and will continue burning through the night. Approaching the cripple, he doesn't say a word, his whole attention directed solely to the inferno rising into the sky above him. All that's left to do is wait for the next sunrise as the tree succumbs to the fire, so for now, you return back to the hideout, preparing for the final night. Morning comes again, but this time the three are missing, not appearing at the hideout like normal. With the tree having burned all through the night, you return back to the village, and as you approach it, you can hear the sound of wind, something that you haven't really heard before, showing just how contained and isolated the forest was. Nearing the place where the tree used to be, there is now a path past the smoldering, charred remains of the roots and tree trunk, leading you out of the swamp and onto the road home. You walk along a dirt path, trodden with footsteps, past some ruined houses and out onto the paved road. Up ahead, you see a fallen road sign with the word Darkwood crossed out, and past that, find the cripple who managed to crawl all this way. With no option to talk to him, you keep moving, passing by strange statues of people and animals all mid-stride, walking or crawling forward. Some of them look as if they're emerging from the ground, and further along, you start seeing the statues becoming more and more disfigured, looking more like huge worms being created from the earth. Eventually, you walk up to a truck stopped in front of a wall of trees blocking off the road, forcing you to take a side path going deeper into the forest, hoping that wherever you end up, it'll be better than here. You emerge from the trees onto a grassy field, passing by some power lines as you approach your neighborhood. It's weird feeling nostalgia for a place you've never seen before, and yet, passing by the apartment buildings and small playground, you can't help but feel a certain connection to the place, making it feel like home. Passing by your neighbor sitting on a bench, you can actually say hi to them before entering your apartment building. From there, you take the stairs to your floor and go up the corridor until you reach your apartment, taking out your key and opening the door. You take off your coat and hat, then go to the kitchen where your wife left you a note saying that she made some soup and that you can heat it up yourself. You didn't experience hunger in the forest, but now it seems like all of that is gone, so you turn on the stove and cook yourself a bowl, eating it right on the spot. Going into the living room, you're greeted by your pet dog, excited to see you after such a long absence. You locked your bedroom, so you search through the wardrobes trying to find the key, eventually grabbing it and unlocking the door to the only thing in this world that matters right now. The rustle of the woods stretching away to the horizon kept the stranger awake for a long time. Eventually, fatigue washed over him, and the man fell into a deep, much-desired dream. Of course, this is Darkwood we're talking about, so this isn't the end. You see, burning the tree is only one of two ways that you can get out of the swamp and onto the road home, so you can't just beat the game once if you want to see everything there is to see. Finding the other way to escape the swamp requires us to go back, all the way to the beginning of Chapter 2, where we emerge from the bunker tunnel and explore the hideout to find the note left by the outsider group. The two locations that get marked on the map are the tree and the junkyard cottage, and with the tree being one of the ways out, what's the chance that the cottage has information about the other one? If you talk to the snail and then either helped it out or killed it on accident, you'll be able to access the cottage under the shell, entering it through the hole in the shell or returning when the snail left. On the inside, the cottage looks just as bad as on the outside, and exploring more, you'll find a map, a note, and a radio next to a dead body covered in roots lying on the bed. The map marks a new location called the radio tower, and reading the note, it's written by presumably the guy lying on the bed talking about the radio. According to him, it seems to be receiving a signal from the radio tower, which he finds strange considering that nobody used the tower in a couple of years. Leaving the cottage, the radio turns on, and you first hear crows, followed by a voice barely discernible through the static. Remembering back to when you first talked to the talking tree, one of the options you had was to listen to the faces, hearing the word radio. So that, combined with what just happened in the cottage, leads us to investigate. Approaching the place, the guy writing the journal wasn't wrong. The radio tower is almost completely surrounded by trees and roots, with only a small passage allowing you to get anywhere near it. Approaching the building, you can find the doctor for the third time, and speaking to him, he's gone completely mad. Lying on the ground, his face is completely covered in mud, with a crown of sticks residing on his head. He doesn't talk too much, more busy chewing on dirt and wood, but gossiping with him, he'll eventually get up and walk over to you, hugging you and saying, "Soon. Very soon. Not long from now." Looking for a way into the radio tower, you'll find that it's surrounded by fences and more roots, forcing you to go all the way around the back in order to trigger the growths allowing you to move this crate out of the way. At this point, if you freed the snail from the cottage, you'll find it here, eaten by the banshee babies that are nesting around the tower. The snail shell blocks one of the paths you could have normally taken, so you take a different one, going along the edge of a huge ravine, killing the sleeping banshee babies with melee attacks to avoid waking the other ones up. Eventually you reach the backside of the radio building, but with a growth blocking your path forward, you're forced to go inside to find the connected eye in the corner of one of the rooms. Making it around the whole place, you come up to the front of the building, where you find a lone savage banging his head against the locked radio tower door. Inspecting the door requires a new code, and the stranger now confirms his association with the outsiders by saying that he thinks he remembers it, hoping that the others haven't changed it. Trying it out, surely enough, the code is correct, and you enter the radio room, where you find the walls lined with dysfunctional radio equipment and a hatch leading to another tunnel, but not a single person in sight. The place has obviously been abandoned for years, with the radio equipment getting rusted and the floor now covered in roots, not to mention the transmission tower itself, which has toppled from its base. Going over there, you can find a small camp containing some spare compressor parts, which leads me to think that this is where the members of that swamp group who went to the junkyard ended up, hiding here for an unknown reason after getting the spare parts, unable to return to the hideout. Eventually, they started going mad, drawing those strange lines in the ground around the camp and using charcoal and paper to make drawings of Bunker Door 21, which they most likely used at some point before. When you find the camp, all the members are dead, with 3 of them buried under a makeshift roof, and the 4th guy, who died last, lying on the ground nearby, covered in dead birds and roots. Going back to the radio room and inspecting the hatch, all that's said about it is that it leads down to another underground tunnel, and with no other option, you descend again. This tunnel looks a lot more abandoned than the previous one, but hey, at least it's not flooded. Right at the entrance, you find an unlocked crate with a flashlight and a note, describing how the military group sent to the swamp was able to evacuate through this tunnel, albeit with some casualties. Going through the tunnel, the left side is blocked by roots, forcing you to go to the right to a floodgate, where the stranger notes that he'll only have one chance to go through, as he'll have to lock the first door to proceed. Knowing you only have one attempt at whatever is coming up next, the anxiety starts building as you proceed further down the tunnel, reaching a lever for the locked door ahead. Trying to pull it to open the door, the stranger is unable due to the white growths causing the lever to jam, so you attempt to get rid of them. Hitting them with a melee weapon results in the spores exploding, filling the tunnel with an unknown gas that quickly knocks you out and starts the final dream scene. You start right where you got knocked out, but now the lever is gone, so all you're left to do is follow the splitting path down past an unlocked door where you find a flashlight. You walk down the winding tunnel, following another voice in the darkness, passing by an underground ravine before reaching a small flooded part of the cave, leading you to a bunker door. The tunnel changes, turning into the tunnel from the underground entrance, before abruptly ending and opening up into a familiar room. The same room where the doctor first locked you up and interrogated you. At this point, you retrace the actions from the prologue, crafting a lockpick, breaking down the door, and then entering the generator room to loot the chest for a table leg and a pill. Just like in the prologue, multiple black chompers start breaking through, but this time they can actually kill you, so you run, going to where Janik was hiding, vaulting out the window and running down to the health facility, all while being chased down. The game throws another obstacle at you as the metal door out of the health facility gets jammed, requiring it to be hit with a table leg, all while the chompers close in behind you. The first time I was going here blind, I wasn't expecting the game to do this, so the chomper chasing me almost killed me. The only reason I survived was because after lunging at me, the chomper ended up disappearing like a kid whose parents have been calling him to dinner for 30 minutes. After escaping the chompers, you head back, entering the same tunnels from a bit ago, only now the floor changed, being covered in these white, pulsating growths. The walls themselves start pulsating as you keep backtracking through the tunnels, passing by the same pool of water that has now turned blood red. You pass by the same ravine, and in the tunnel up ahead, walk out into a large opening, with a woman kneeling on the ground, praying to something we can't see. You get swallowed by a large mouth that appears in the wall, and the music fades as you re-enter the man-made tunnel, only now on the other side of that door. You see that it's been blocked by a bunch of rubble, so grabbing the shovel from nearby, you start digging, and now able to open the door, loop back to where the dream started. Emerging out of the hatch, you're standing in the remains of a hideout in the middle of an empty field, and as you make sense of your surroundings, the road home music slowly fades in. Following the only path to the right, you walk into a muddy field, empty of any crop, with an overturned wagon and a lone scarecrow in the middle. Getting up close, you can see that it's not wearing its regular clothes, but instead a ripped hazard suit and a metal helmet, eerily similar to the one worn by the trader. Further ahead, you find 3 trees, 2 of which have dead people tied to them, while the middle one is empty, with only a bloodied, torn rope on the ground nearby. Past that, you walk up to a military camp set up in a nearby house, seemingly abandoned, with a few dead savages lying on the ground alongside the corpse of another soldier, carrying a rifle and a damaged handheld radio. It seems like the people sent out here were responsible for monitoring the tree roots passing underground. As revealed by a note near the ruined hideout, these roots growing from individual trees intertwine and all grow in a particular direction, towards Sector 0. The note also mentions a substance that flows through the roots, noting how once it's been taken out of the root stream, it loses its shape-shifting abilities. Another note found in the main camp details observations regarding the forest as a whole, writing about how it has a honeycomb structure when photographed from a helicopter and describing the composition, with only 15% of the tree wall volume consisting of real trees. Heading down from the camp, you run into the exposed tree roots mentioned in the reports, looking like huge bundles of wires underground, all leading in the same direction. Past these roots you'll find another house, stuck in between the trees, devoid of anything except for a barricaded door, opening which leads you onto the road home. From here, the endings meet up, and you follow the road like before, eventually going down off of it and entering the epilogue. Before doing that, though, you can return to where the talking tree was, now approaching it from the back, where you find the 3 silently standing in front of it. Examining the tree, you can't see any of the faces, but looking past it, there you can notice the rooftops of the buildings in the swamp village, so close yet so far away. The tree thanks you for sparing it, telling you to go on now, following the road to return home, and with nothing else to do, you take its advice, passing by those same statues, taking a right down through the trees, leaving the forest for good. From here, everything is the same. Walk through the field, pass by the playground and apartments, go up the stairs to your apartment, and fall asleep. Everyone loves a happy ending, but then you return to the main menu and the save file still persists, so you load it back up and you're brought to the start of the epilogue again. Now there's the question of why are we allowed to replay the epilogue if all that we do is walk to our apartment and end the game. If you think about it, it seems strange how after everything you went through, it all just ends so abruptly the moment you exit the swamp. You just sort of stroll through the woods and arrive at your neighborhood before going up to your apartment and opening it with a key that was never mentioned before. What more, passing by your neighbor, you actually speak to her, which doesn't make any sense since throughout the game speaking was never an option, and instead interactions with others involved shaking or nodding your head or physically showing the item you wanted to get more information about. All this prompts you to look deeper, and exploring the neighborhood you'll find that things are not as they seem. Going around outside, trying to go up or down, you'll notice the apartments keep looping, and at a certain point it's possible to find some of those floor worms growing on the ground near a trash can. Going inside, you can walk up and down the corridors and also take the staircase down to the basement. Going up the corridor on the first floor, you'll run into a drunk man lying on the ground, and approaching him he'll call you boss, which is something only one character in the entire game did. The door next to him is locked, but as you walk away, a woman opens it, telling you to be quiet as to not wake the baby. At this point, things are getting pretty weird, so you go into the basement, which, just like in any horror game, is pretty damn dark. By the looks of it, the basement is used as a storage space by the residents, with the small corridors being lined with locked wooden doors leading to small separate rooms. It all seems normal here until you walk down and notice some odd mushrooms growing next to a door with a passive black chomper behind it. Going the opposite way, you follow the corridor as it hooks to the left and then to the right, before coming to an end near a partially open door. Inside, you'll find some food supplies like bags of potatoes and canned jams, alongside a radio on the table, which you can interact with. It amazes me how even in the epilogue, where you're basically playing a cutscene where nothing can harm you, the game still manages to make me feel stressed about walking down a pitch-black corridor. With the radio telling you to go to sleep, now you have even less of a reason to do so. So when you reach your floor, instead of going to your apartment, what if you just kept walking? Just like outside, the hallway stretches on forever, and as you keep walking, you'll see the floor slowly getting covered in roots, to a point where it's all that you see on the ground. With that, you find your door again, and enter the apartment, fully aware that you're not at home. Entering your apartment, you go through the motions, taking off your coat, heating up the soup, but going into the living room, the roots have spread, now appearing from under the furniture. Pulling one of the wardrobes away and inspecting the roots, they seem to be coming from under the floor, so you roll up the carpet to try to pull the floorboards apart. Grabbing a screwdriver from under the sink, you start ripping away the wood, and the illusion breaks. The light outside fades along with the music as you realize you're still in the forest, stuck in a dream. The pulsating roots stretch across the uncovered concrete, appearing from the bedroom and covering the rest of the apartment. Going into the bedroom, they appear from under the bed, so fighting the urge to fall asleep, knowing this is fake, you look under it. I feel a gentle draft coming from the dark gap between the bed and the floor. My fingertips brush a thin layer of dust, coldness, moisture. I'm touching something rough, but my arm is too short to catch it. I think I need to move the bed. You drag the bed aside, uncovering the remaining bit of flooring, ripping it away to reveal a hole in the ground from where the roots appear. With no other choice, you climb into it, and the dream ends. You wake up on the rough ground, completely naked, in the middle of a root-filled valley. Your clothes are strewn across the ground, and going past them, you find a steep slope with a tunnel in the side, presumably the one you climbed through to make it here, now made inaccessible by pulsating growths in it. Looking around, you see other naked people like you, sleepers, all in a deep dream. I'm at the bottom of a huge valley. I feel the dry, dusty earth pulsating under my feet. They're asleep. They seem happy, even though they're emaciated and dirty. Some of them lie dead. The earth is covered with thick bundles of dry roots that creak under my feet, and old, broken trees. You continue moving forward, passing even more sleepers, at this point too many of them to count, and soon start seeing a bright light growing as you approach it. A pleasant warmth washes over me. You pass people kneeling on the ground, bowing to the light, and approaching it further, the haze dissipates, revealing a white swirling mass that forms into a human face. Whatever the being is, it's responsible for the people here, and as you place your hand on it, you're overwhelmed by the comforting feeling of happiness and security, making you feel like home, wanting to go to sleep. But still you resist it, attempting to withdraw your hand. You concentrate your entire body on the simple action of lifting it away from the being, feeling as the warmth fades, being replaced by a piercing cold. You move away from the being, knowing that this is real, continuing to walk, looking for something else. It's Maciek from the old woods, also dirty, naked, and sleeping, clutching onto his beloved flamethrower. You know what you must do, trying to wake him up, but when that fails, you're given no choice but to pry the flamethrower from his grasp, to which he resists, but you're stronger than him. With the flamethrower in your hands, the atmosphere changes as some of the people start waking up, crawling towards you, begging you not to do it. The valley goes up in flames as the screams of thousands pierce the air. The being burns, the roots around it burn, the people burn. You try to run, but the flames are surrounding the valley, cutting off your ways out. You start running back along the roots, turning around, following the edge, but you run into a horde of sleepers who all woke up and are now trying to cross the fallen tree, climbing over each other, not caring about anyone but themselves. They too burn as the fire catches up to you. You continue crawling across the tree to the other side, but the flames move too fast, catching up to you again, surrounding you. Your last moments are filled with unbearable pain. As the camera pans over the burning forest, the fates of all those who you encountered are revealed. Most of them end up perishing in the flames, unable to run or hide, but a few manage to survive, appearing when the flames subside, now able to leave the forest for good. In the end, all the characters' fates depend solely on you, and with all the options you have, there's a lot of ways each of the characters' stories can end. Alternatively, killing everyone, the message changes completely for both the bliss and the true ending, labeling you as a monster in Scarecrow's clothing, who, due to reasons only known to himself, killed everyone who crossed him. Now, you've gotten both endings, but what about the story? It's still unclear as to how the forest became this way and what the true ending was all about. There's still a lot of unexplained events and unanswered questions left, and now with the game done, it's about time to go back and make sense of it all. The key collectible item that starts the story is titled Painting from 1975, found in the main house in the Swamp Village, accessible after grabbing the key from the Mushroom Granny's shelf. Inside the house there's a table under which you'll find a small container with multiple paintings, all dated by year. This painting is called Light, and depicts a white glowing mass falling from the sky, signifying the arrival of the being somewhere in Poland around 1975. The being itself is what you saw in the true ending, a large alien organism that looks like a spiraling mass of roots and eyes, covered in the white substance, hooked up to the roots that spread across the valley and through the forest. This white substance is the main and sole reason for the forest's existence, as its ability to shapeshift allowed it to replicate trees, growing the forest and trapping the inhabitants inside. Besides the trees, the substance was also able to create copies of living beings, although not very accurately, resulting in most creations consisting of a mix of multiple nearby organisms and objects. This is seen a lot in the swamp, with you being able to come across corpses lying on the ground, with lizards or centipedes laid out on them. From there, the substance melds them into a single creature, partial white versions of which can also be encountered in the swamp as you explore. Going further, some of the characters you meet are created by the being as well, with two of the best examples being the Traitor and the Wolfman. The Traitor is most likely a copy of the Stranger, probably created when he was passed out tied to the tree, as the Traitor has his key, journal, and wears a similar hazard suit. Knowing that he's a copy of the Stranger, him helping you but also persuading you against going further into the forest makes sense now, as he was genuinely trying to keep you as far from the being as possible, knowing what would happen if you succumb to it. The Wolfman is a bit harder to understand, but his origin ties back to the hunter's house in the old woods. The best speculation regarding the Wolfman is that he's an amalgamation of the hunter and one of the trophies in the house, which when found appears to be empty. The reason for believing this lies in the connection between the hunter, the pretty lady, and the Wolfman, all of whom have one item in common, the wedding ring. This item can be found both in the house and in the pretty lady's room, but another fake substance-created copy can be found on the Wolfman if you kill him. This connection leads to the conclusion that when the hunter died, he had the ring on him, so when the substance created the Wolfman, the ring was copied over, just like the cross from Bunker Tunnel 21. Besides the shape-shifting substance, the being is also responsible for the spread of the plague, a pathogen transmitted through airborne spores emitted from the being. After the forest grew isolated, the plague was able to spread throughout, and it adversely affected both the humans and the animals. These effects vary, but can mostly be categorized between physical and mental alterations. People like the pretty lady, musician, or musician's parents show the physical effects, while savages, the doctor, and the stranger are all affected mentally, leading to increased aggression, hallucinations, and the inability to speak. From there, the plague progresses, and in the case of the second type of symptoms, people will start hearing voices telling them to come home, causing them to follow the voice, eventually coming to the being's valley. This is something you can see the stranger dealing with, but is also happening to the doctor and the snail, with the snail trying to reach the radio tower bunker after you set it free, only to be eaten by the banshees. With both the white substance and the airborne plague, the being is capable of spreading its influence, seemingly terraforming and infecting everything around it. If you remember the embryos that I mentioned way back at the Silent Forest Gateway, there's a good chance that those embryos are copies of the being, or at least parts of it in very early stages of growth. With the stranger being infected by the plague, it would make sense that eating these embryos you're consuming the being's life force and gaining lives as a result. As for the sleepers, it appears that the plague eventually overpowers them and causes them to fall into an eternal dream, allowing the being to consume them, most likely through the roots, turning them into more of that white substance. Once the being started altering the forest, the abnormal activity was noticed by the government, who sent out military forces to investigate and study the occurrences. They were the ones to build underground tunnels through the forest, allowing them to traverse it quickly and without disturbing the natives. They also set up multiple hideouts, equipping them with ovens designed to spread a protective substance they created to combat the plague. From there, they started sending groups to various locations, supplying them with all the essentials to research the forest and stop the being from getting out of control. In some cases, these groups ended up interacting with the natives and local wildlife, burning down people's houses, creating tension that eventually resulted in them having to evacuate. The stranger was one of these people, and from his journal, we learned that he's been on multiple successful expeditions prior to getting stranded. A short time before the start of the game, the stranger was sent on another expedition with a group, traveling further into the forest than before, going through the longest tunnel to reach a very faraway zone. There they were to monitor the routes, and is where they collected samples of the substance, learning about its shape-shifting properties. Everything was going fine, but being this far into the forest had its risks, and those risks realized themselves when a large group of savages attacked the camp. They caught the stranger and two of his colleagues, tying them to trees, but the stranger managed to escape, taking off his damaged hazard suit in place of the scarecrow's clothes, escaping into the forest and eventually reaching the doctor's house before passing out. From there the game begins, and you know what happens. You barely survive the villager horde in the doctor's house, finding yourself in one of your hideouts in the dry meadow after getting rescued by the trader. You meet the many strange inhabitants of the forest, completing their errands in the hopes of finding your key to the bunker. Eventually you make it to the swamp and explore there, running into the horrifying being-created abominations while trying to find a way out. Then you make it onto the road home, the same road almost everyone told you not to follow, but you follow it anyways, passing by the scarecrow and the tree you were tied to, eventually taking a path off the road deeper into the woods. It is at this point where the being's influence overtakes you, and after finding the tunnel you reach the being's valley and fall asleep, starting the epilogue in a dream. Most likely because the being is an alien organism, it isn't all too familiar with our world yet, so just like with the inaccuracies in the white substance clones, the dream the being fabricated has imperfections that you can notice. Doing this, you realize you're dreaming and wake up, now able to see what everyone else can't. Finding the being, it tries to overpower you again, but you resist, and after taking the flamethrower, lay waste to the valley, burning down everything around you and sacrificing yourself in the process. We always expect the protagonist to win, beating the odds and reaching the goal, but stories where that doesn't happen always interested me more. Darkwood is unforgiving, and the stranger is just that, a nobody caught up in the events, a victim of circumstance left to die in the forest. Sure, he manages to survive at first, but the forest affects him like it does the rest, changing him to a point where even if he did escape, he'd probably never recover. Still, he doesn't know that, continuing to fight, doing anything necessary to find a way out, even if it means making those around him suffer. In the end, there's blood on his hands no matter what he does, and he's given one final choice, the only choice that actually matters. Remain blissfully ignorant and die happy, or sacrifice himself, dying in pain, knowing that he did the right thing. Either way, escaping the forest was never an option.